morning. Welcome to the May 13th, 2009 budget study session. May we have a roll call, please?
Council members: Draymond.
I'm here.
Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Quintero.
Here. What's next?
Today we have a special meeting, Director of Administrative Services, Finance, regarding citywide budget study session discussions.
Mr. Starbird.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This is study session number 3. To pick up where we left off yesterday, we have 6 departments for you to review the budgets for the upcoming fiscal year and discuss your policy direction for those. Taking some feedback from yesterday, we have made some slight adjustments in today's presentation, and frankly want to take a step here and do a little better job of communicating what we'd like on your part today. I think yesterday there was a sense that it was more of a general overview, and at some point we would come back into the meat of the budgets and really have a discussion about some of the tough policy decisions. We will do that, but we'd also like whatever feedback you'd like to give us today about any of the proposed reductions that you hear, areas, if we haven't touched on them, you'd like us to look at, areas you're particularly sensitive to, ideas that you'd like us to explore further. Any of those thoughts that you have today, we'd like to hear those in each of the department areas. The department managers have had to, frankly, on many occasions adjust their thinking about how they approach balancing the budgets and presenting the alternatives to you today. And so now is the time, if you want us to explore other areas, to please begin to get those out for us. With that, let me go to Mr. McFall.
Thank you, Mr. Starbird, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Is echoing and building a bit on the comments of Mr. Starbird. We at the front end of the presentations were yesterday with those initial departments. We're spending a bit of time going over structure. We're going to spend a lot less time on that. We've actually removed the section that deals with the accomplishments on it, and really going to the meat of what our real issue is, and that is how do they see adjusting services in order to be able to accommodate the budget. The other thing, we have, at this point in time, in our budget review, we've only been looking at the reductions up to the 5% level, although we have actually asked departments to submit reductions that would go all the way to 7.5%. We have not entertained making any decisions on those last 2.5% of reductions. We don't have any recommendations on those, but we are going to share those with council with what Department C would be the next 2.5%, because it does appear to be clear that we are going to have to go somewhat into the next 2.5%. So we're going to be lay those out for council today. So you'll see the totality, the picture up to 7.5%. Also, Parks and Recreation yesterday we're did a good job of laying out the reductions from the standpoint of personnel. But we didn't spend a lot of time on the programmatic implications, and that's what we really want departments to spend time on today, is not just the positions, but really expressing what is the actual real-life implication. And I'll just say this is hard for departments to do because, frankly, they want to be team players and they want to just make it work. But there are issues behind it, and you were very clear yesterday saying you don't want surprises in the end, and we definitely don't either. So we're going to actually ask Parks and Recreation at one of the upcoming meetings to come back in and talk about their reductions more from a programmatic and implication perspective. With that, I think we are ready to begin with the first one, which will be library.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council, city staff, and members of the public. I'm Cindy Cleary, Director of Libraries, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the library's upcoming year. Oops. Got to figure this out first. I'll start by stating what our mission statement is. The Glendale Public Library provides services, materials, and activities to enrich life, foster literacy, inspire intellectual curiosity, and stimulate the imagination. Our core service, the library, is a civic center and community gathering place where people of all ages and backgrounds are connected to information and reading resources using a variety of technologies, programming, and traditional print formats. And you see below that sections of responsibility, including children's services, adult services, art and music services, literacy services, and neighborhood services. Just a quick overview of some of the statistics that reflect how we serve the public. We have a central library, 6 branch libraries, the Brand Art and Music Library, which includes a gallery and recital hall, and the Bookmobile. We get about 3,000, a little over 3,000 visitors a day throughout our library system, and we check out books and other materials to the tune of about 23,000 per week. Overall, we every year, well, in 2007-8, we had 1,600, a little over 1,600 programs that would include story hours, author series, teen programs. We have a variety of programming with 51,000, a little over 51,000 attendees. The library system has 114 computers available to the public, and those computers access Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and the Internet. And this past year, we had over 256,000 people use those computers. In the beginning of 2008-9, all departments were asked to take a 5% reduction. The library took a reduction of $427,696. The service reductions attached to that were that we reduced branch hours by, actually that's incorrect, 35 hours overall. Central library we reduced by 4 hours. We closed at 8 instead of 9 Monday through Thursday. Our Chevy Chase branch was unfunded, but at council direction we continued operation, absorbing some of the costs with some of the vacancies that we have. And our Library Connection, our new library at Adams Square, which we intended to open on Sundays, was not able to open on Sundays. And I've outlined below for your review the cost savings measures that we took related to the service cuts. I won't go through those because you've already approved them, and we'll go on to this year. Mid-March or in March or at the end, I guess mid-year, all departments were asked to propose additional 5% cuts, and we took some cuts in March. The library eliminated the literacy coordinator position, which it was really, in terms of cuts, it was probably the easiest cut for us to take because we have grant funding, state grant funding affiliated with the literacy department. So we were able to absorb some of the costs through the grant, and we consolidated some of the services in other departments. And we'll be hiring an hourly person with grant funding to replace the literacy coordinator position. In other words, service has continued, but we have reassessed and we have downsized a little bit. This reflects our preliminary budget for 9/10. And this includes the general fund and all other library funds, showing a deficit of about $17,000 from the year before. The general fund is inclusive of the loss of the literacy coordinator position to the $73,000. And then our library fund includes some things I'll show you in a minute, but we're proposing a $55,000 increase due to increases in fees and the cost allocation impact and some decreases in grant funding. Overall, it ends up being about $55,000 more than last year. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of our non-general fund funds, we have state grants that we receive. Those are steadily declining and have been steadily declining for the past 10 years. But we do receive some money for our literacy program, interlibrary loan reimbursement, which interestingly enough, libraries loan to other libraries, and the state reimburses us for those loans. Public Library Fund, and staff education grant, which allows some of our in-house people to go to receive their master's degrees at several of the programs throughout Southern California. So overall, state grants, we earn about a little over $200,000 that support those different programs, that support staffing. The Public Library Fund in particular supplements our book and other materials budget, which is a big help, and we look forward to it not declining anymore. We do some revenue generation. Our auditorium and our meeting rooms collect fees. We have it's not quite revenue neutral because we are earning money. We offer print and copy services to the public, which earns some money. And some of our various fees, including processing fees that we collect for books that are lost. So overall, we are predicting about $112,000 in revenue for the next year. We have increased our fees, and we are going to propose increasing our fees even more for auditorium rental, for library fines, quite a long list that you approved a while back, so that we anticipate an increase in our fees from prior years. I will mention here, too, that the other thing that we are proposing and wanting to move forward with in 910 is allowing library venues to be used for filming opportunities. So we did a test case with Criminal Minds, earned about $3,000. So we have put forth, I don't have it today, but we have put forth a proposal of fees for filming at libraries. And we think we are a hot venue because libraries normally, as a rule, do not allow filming because of the disruption factor. Donations to the library, we receive quite a few donations from community members, but also most of that $65,000 comes from the Friends of the Library, who mostly support our programming, our summer reading program, and different programs, the author series. It also gives us some flexibility in allowing our staff to go to training sessions and to do in-house training. And then all of these accounts do earn interest. This year we expect it's declined a little bit from last year because of the economy, about $30,000 in interest, which we also use to supplement our book and materials budgets. So, as Mr. McFall mentioned, we were all asked to propose a 5% reduction for the next year. And we've already taken the literacy coordinator position from our accounts. But the other things that we're proposing, I should preface this by saying that in the 5% cut, I'm trying to minimize the impact to the public as much as I can, and I want to, as has been mentioned before in the budget study sessions, we want to avoid layoffs of full-time people. We also have we rely heavily on part-time staff, so I am trying to avoid eliminating part-time staff from being cut anymore. Last year, our part-time staff was cut by about 20% of our overall budget, and that does impact service. So to that effect, what I'm trying to do is, or what I've done is looked at our organization, and I'm proposing a reorganization that will include some loss of vacant positions, and will realize a savings of $114,000. It will also allow us to hire some of our current vacancies that I consider to be critical to the operation, one being a library assistant for Armenian outreach, totally dedicated and targeted to the Armenian community, and also the assistant director position to give me more capacity for seeking revenue, generating options, and also doing more community outreach. So that $114,000 is a combination, as I say, of losing some vacant positions, adding or hiring some people. And the full 114 would not be able to be realized in July, obviously. It would be annualized, and we would have to do it in succession. This is probably the largest impact to the public in this 5%, and that would be to close holiday weekends. That would mean closing 13 additional closed days for a total of $40,000. We think that this would... Holiday weekends are normally light traffic because people are doing other things, and they don't necessarily come to the library as their first priority. So that is something that we're proposing for next year. And also some transfer of positions. We have a lot of capital projects coming up, so we're proposing transferring, I think, about 50%, no, not 50%, a little more than 50% of an administrator position to our CIP projects, transferring a library technician position that currently is working for our interlibrary loan department to the non-general fund, minor cuts, which would be rebinding damaged library materials to the tune of $2,000, that helped us balance everything. And finally, we need to talk a little bit today about the Chevy Chase Branch Library, which, as I mentioned earlier, is currently unfunded. We have continued operation, but it has been at the cost of other operations. So I've put together for your review and consideration, probably at a later date, but I'd like your input today, a couple of options for Chevy Chase. First of all, right now it is unfunded, so we could go into the new year thinking that, I'm going out of order here, but thinking that we will close Chevy Chase in the next year if we cannot find funding for it. Option 1 and 2, the first one is a lower cost option, $30,869,000, and the option 2 is at $55,000, which is pretty much status quo, and would mean the $55,000 option 2, would allow us to maintain the same number of hours and the same number of staff. What we'd like to do in both options is really focus attention on children's services. The community has come out in strength, and there's been a lot of volunteer activity at Chevy Chase, and what it has shown us over the past year was that service up there, the main focus of service up there is really on children's services, so I would like to reorient or refocus the operation to really focus on children's services and rely on borrowing from other libraries for adult materials. So option 1, which is the lower cost option, would allow us to, or would require us to close or reduce hours from 18 to 12 per week. And option 2, we would maintain the current hours that we have now, which are the 18 hours a week. So as not to come forward and ask for additional money, what I am proposing, if we were to go with option 1 or 2, is for the library to take less than a 5% cut. And in the case of option 1, we would be taking a 4.6% cut to accommodate the $30,000, and in option 2, we would take a 4.3 reduction to accommodate option 2. And that's because we've already taken a cut of $55,000 for the budget, for the Chevy Chase budget. Any questions on that one?
Is there increased usage in the past year, let's say?
Yeah, actually the past 2 years we've seen usage increase. And if you recall, in 2007, under Nancy Hunt Coffey's direction, we increased hours at all of our libraries, and then we saw a spike in use at that point. And now with the community involvement in the branch, we also have seen an increase in use of the library. Just to put it in perspective, though, the Chevy Chase Branch Library, let's see. If we base usage on the number of materials checked out, the Chevy Chase Library last year circulated 7,000 books in the year. And actually, right now, we're about at the same number. And the Central Library circulated 530,000 books. Our largest branch, which is Brand Library, circulates about 139,000 items, books and other items.
How about some of the others in comparison?
Let's see, the next highest is Montrose at 121,000. Our smaller branches, Casa Verdugo, 51,000. Grandview, 43,000.
Adams Square.
Adams Square is a little above right now. I don't have that right here, but Adams Square is a little bit above Casa, which is 50. Well, we expect it to be a little bit above Casa, probably in the 60,000 range.
So even Adams Square, which is your smallest branch by square footage, would still be 50 to 60,000.
Yeah. And Adams Square is booming, I'm sure. They are doing, for a 2,200 square foot facility, they are doing incredibly well. Then the bookmobile, interestingly enough, that gives you another perspective, is close to 39,000 books a year, comparable to one of our smaller branches, a little less than one of our smaller branches. Nevertheless, Chevy Chase has a very supportive community, and I think I think we could provide a level of service up there. The other part of my proposal for Chevy Chase is to really focus on revenue generation. So if we were to go into filming, I think Chevy Chase would be a wonderful venue. The parking isn't great, but smaller film companies might be amenable to using it. I also think it's a great venue for events, birthday parties, especially up in that community. Meetings, conferences, and I think with some minor modifications to the facility, I think we could make it a much more attractive rental facility, and we could earn revenue. I mean, this obviously wouldn't happen the first year, but long term, I think if we look at it long term, we could probably earn enough revenue to either enhance service or continue to maintain it. But if we could get through the next year until we kind of work that out with some level of funding and keeping it open for some number of hours, I think that would probably be the best solution. But as I say, it's up to your consideration and recommendation. Yeah, I went, yeah, I missed that. Thank you.
Carrie.
Need to back it up.
Yeah, previous,
Awfully quick to
okay.
the end.
Sorry, my eyes aren't very good from here.
Now, or are we turning it down?
Not yet. She needs.
Oh, she's still-
She needs to back up a bit.
Oh, okay.
Oops, did I lose it? Okay, or you do it too? Okay, I'm going to let you do it. Hey. Okay. Got it. All right. And then when we get to the idea of a 7.5% reduction or another 2.5% reduction from the first 5%, it gets a little more difficult not to impact direct public service. And so at 2.5%, we would recommend reducing Casa Verdugo Branch Library and the Grandview Branch Library from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. And that would include consolidating some of our management staff. We've already done that in the last round, but continue to do some consolidation of management staff and ask that they work harder and oversee more than one site or unit. Our Adams Square Library and Pacific Park libraries would be reduced from 5 to 4. The reasoning behind 5 to 3, 5 to 4 is really based on usage. So our higher use facilities, we're proposing fewer impacts or less severe impacts. The Montrose Library, we would go from 5 to 4 days per week. Brand Library, also 5 to 4 days per week. We would need to eliminate technology support internally to all our public computers. So if a computer went out on a night or a weekend, we just put an out-of-order sign on it and wait until the next morning. And then we would also need to reduce our hardware and software support. So that's at the 7.5% level. Finally, future challenges and impacts. I'll just go through these quickly. You know, other departments have said the same thing, meeting the increased demand for service in light of reduced budgets. The library in particular, in hard economic times, we're seeing an increase in use of our libraries, more people coming for just a place to be, for job services. You know, we are a place for people without homes to come to during the day. We're seeing an increase in that kind of usage. Of course, we regulate behavior in the library, so people that come in the library are using the library for the purpose that it's intended. Decreasing grant opportunities, I mentioned that earlier. Rising costs of materials, increasing energy costs, outdated infrastructure. We are going to be addressing some of that through our CIP projects that we'll talk about at a later date. Security issues, particularly at Central Library. I mean, over the years, we've just seen increasing issues at Central Library and calls to police and some severe problems some not so severe problems, which we're trying to mitigate as best we can. Addressing salary adjustments based on market study comparisons. Our management series, if you compare task to task, is probably about 5 to 10% below market. And obviously, right now we can't address that, but that is an upcoming issue over the next 5 years or so. Changing service models. We have more need for multilingual, underserved communities. That's why we want to go ahead and hire our library assistant for Armenian services. Increased need. Our population, including myself, is only aging, is getting older and older and aging, and there are more issues related to people living longer, and that's correlated with an increased need for service, different kinds of services. Need for succession training, and the continued quest to look at different revenue-generating options. I'd like to, we received a significant bequest, which right now is in a city account earning interest, that I'd like to find a way to create a foundation and leverage that money to have ongoing, so we have ongoing long-term support from that bequest. I'd like to also at some point look at the possibility of a tax assessment for libraries, but that takes some study. And then other revenue-generating options like filming at libraries. I'm sure there are other things we haven't even thought of. So those are some of our challenges and impacts and opportunities, too. And finally,
Mr. Najarian?
questions.
Okay. I guess our current library model is to maintain as best we can the numerous branches that we have, and in times of cuts to decrease hours and services throughout. How about the idea of centralizing everything, putting everything we've got into the central library, keeping the hours and the days as long as possible, keeping all the services. The disadvantage would be the geographical ability for people to travel, but 7 days a week from 9 to 9, presumably, or whatever, for extended hours, we would have one library that would do everything that would serve everyone's needs. How does that concept relate to our current sort of decentralized library concept?
Well, first of all, I'll say that in looking at budgets over the last 2 years and the decline in our budgets, the need to reduce our budgets, I've really put a lot of emphasis on central library. I mean, I have done the best I can to minimize the number of hours that we reduced. I mean, I've taken more hours from branches than from central library. So my idea is that we should put as many resources as we can in central library. Eventually I'd like to talk about, we're talking about putting new entrances at Central Library to reach out more to the new downtown area. So I see, I agree with the model that you're talking about in terms of centralizing the bulk of your service in one area. Having said that, I think that all of our neighborhoods, the branch libraries provide a different kind of role than the central library. They rely heavily on central for materials. They also have smaller collections that are geared to the needs of a particular neighborhood. And so I think that if we were to close sites, the impact would really be profound on the neighborhoods that they serve. I think it would be difficult to shutter libraries. We found that out with Chevy Chase Branch Library, where even though it wasn't being used heavily, there was such strong public support that we weren't able to close it. So,
Don't you reach, however, a critical level of hours that once you really drop below and a number of days that are open, that the efficiency and the per dollar value of staffing and maintaining just sort of collapses? Because I'm afraid, I see all these cuts, and I'm not in those libraries and those branches. I'm not exactly sure what that means for someone who wants to use a library, whether when they want to use it, it's closed and they just sort of throw up their hands anyway. I want to make sure that we're not getting to that level where we're cannibalizing the hours from everyone and not having a sufficient resource for the whole community. And that's, I don't have an answer to that. I mean, that's my,
Right.
I'm going on a lot of what you're saying, but
And you're absolutely right. If you cut hours, then usually, obviously, the use declines and people get confused in terms of when you're open, when you're not open. And I think at 7.5%, that would obviously be very reflective of what you're saying. But I guess that's why I tried as best I could in the 5% cut not to have that kind of impact on our branches. And I think we can do it if we are left with a 5% cut. I think your comments are good, and at 7.5%, perhaps we should go back and take another look at that. But I still go back to different neighborhoods have different needs, and like the Casa Verdugo Library, the circulation is 50,000 per year, but that particular community serves a large senior population that probably wouldn't otherwise be able to get to Central Library.
you're a beeline bus away.
Yeah,
15 cents away.
yeah.
Being taken
Yeah.
not just to the Central Library, but to our vibrant downtown. So I understand what you're saying. Now, my general question is, city has proposed the 5, and she says it's workable with 5. You've said you've asked the departments to go to 7.5. Do we know, are we going into that second phase yet, or?
We've asked the departments to provide us an additional 2.5% up to that. We don't know that we would accept all. We wanted just to be able to have more options to look at, recognizing that within that 5%, not all those options necessarily would be accepted, so we need more depth. Secondly, after working through the 5% and all the other reductions, we're still, as we indicated yesterday, we're still $1.3 million away from being balanced. So someplace we are going to have to reach deeper to get literally additional cuts. So it seems likely that going into this next 2.5% will be necessary.
Thank you.
Mr. Draymond, followed by Mr. Weaver.
Well, I am not often tongue-tied up here, but I feel like my head's going to explode at this point. I will never support closing our branch libraries to centralize a library system. Never. It may happen if the votes are here for it, but I will never support it. Matter of fact, Mr. McFall, when you talk about that number that you are short, as far as I'm concerned, you might as well consider it 0.5 instead of 0.3. Because I believe that we should cut your cut in half. We have departments in this city that have traditionally lean budgets. They have lean budgets, and they have traditionally lean budgets. I'm going to guess that I see the city treasurer sitting out there. I'm going to guess that when it's his turn to come to the podium, he's going to tell you that his department is a very lean department, that he always runs it that way, and so it's very hard to make cuts. As a matter of fact, I'm guessing that our city attorney is going to tell you a similar kind of thing. I have no doubt that they will make the proposed proposed cuts that as they were requested to do. But these are lean departments. Our library system has been cut and cut and cut and cut over the years, and it's not just the number of books circulated. And I'm stunned that the questions that are coming from on the dais are all about how many books per square feet. Well, by that model, let's move it all to bookmobiles, because per square footage, it's doing a great job. It's also a place where kids go. It's not just what they're checking out. You go to the Central Library. I don't know how many of you go down there often. Go to the Central Library. There are homeless people that are there that are being, to some degree, looked after. I hate to say it, it's also a shelter. It's also a place the kids go so they're not on the streets. Later, we're going to hear from the police department, I'm sure, and they're going to talk to us about STAR program and PAL program, boxing, equestrian, all of that. And one of the arguments for that is going to be it takes kids off the streets. Well, so do our libraries. And they do it year-round and to the tune of thousands and thousands of attendees per year. Thousands. Let me just go back. $23,000 per week. Per week. 51,000 kids and teens and attendees per year. 51,000. Yeah, we have a beeline, but it also stops running, which is why I can't take the beeline to come here, because I can't go back at night. That's just for starters. I know what you're saying, Mr. Najarian. I know you're not, absolutely dead serious about that. Yeah, is there public transportation of one kind or another where kids can get to the library? Sure, and many of them do. But we're also talking about little kids. We're talking about seniors, and sometimes they're homeless or people that are economically disaffected. So, moving to just a centralized program, no way. Let me go back here a minute. Pardon me. When I hear the director of libraries coming forward at a budget meeting and offering notions of catering and receptions for birthday parties, well, let me put it to you this way. When I was a kid and I would get a quarter for mowing lawns, I used to think to myself, well, I can measure this by ice cream because I like ice cream cones. So ice cream cones at Thrifty's at the time were 5 cents a piece. So mowing a lawn, that meant I could treat myself over the course of a week to 5 ice cream cones. So let's talk about consultants, because that's what keeps bouncing off my head while I sit here and I listen to, really, in my view, hacking our library system to pieces when it already is extremely, extremely lean. 3.5 consultants, that would cover 3.5 fewer consultants. I'm willing to not wear my socks on Thursdays and save the money from washing them to contribute that. Why doesn't everybody in the city do that? The city staff and city employees do that. Look, 3 fewer consultants, $60,000 apiece, 3.5. Boom, there's $200,000 for our libraries. It's very interesting that last go-around, when we sat here and we talked about, well, should we close the city on Fridays or alternating Fridays and all those things, said, well, there'd be about a savings of $180,000 a year. Now, for that little amount of money, why bother? That's almost the number I'm talking about that we should return to the library. And it's $180,000, that's nothing. But it's $400,000 per year we're going to cut the library system? It just makes no sense to me, and I won't support it. What I'm actually going to ask my colleagues to consider, or try to keep an open mind about as we go through this, that rather than a $400,000 cut, this should be a $200,000 cut. We should cut that cut in half. Our libraries serve more, as I say, than just a place to go and get a book or a tape or a DVD. They provide needed civic services that go beyond just infrastructure and things like that. And lastly, let me just say this. Typically in cities, when they cut departments like libraries, those in lean times, those are typically the departments that are the last, absolutely last, if ever, that get those services restored. So, yes, I understand. We can tighten it up. We can make it more economical and efficient. But the only criticism I have, if you want to call it a criticism, for you, Madam Director of Libraries, is that in your desire to not offend your council and to, I think you give the impression that these cuts can just be handled. And I know, because I've had a chance to work with you for 2 years now, that whatever it is that's decided, you'll make it work. I know you will. I have every confidence you will. But you know and I know that those cuts are going to be deep and they're going to be devastating for your program, for your department. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Weaver.
Well, I remember going to the old Central Library back in the 50s, and there was, if I recall right, there was a fraction of the number of people using libraries then than now. I've said before, the evolution of libraries continues with not only the diversity of the public using it, but with the technology providing, and as you said, the services that are being provided. It's not the same library system I studied in where you couldn't hear a pin drop, or some librarian was on your back to keep it quiet. The floors all creaked because they were all wood. You know, it's changing times. Today, I personally think, I don't go to the libraries, but I think a lot of parents tell their kids, when you get out of school, go to the library and I'll pick you up. There. That's a place of safety. If you're not in sports, go down to the library. And they go down, they socialize or do some homework until their parents come and get them 5, 6 o'clock. I was intrigued, something I hadn't thought about till you mentioned it. I'm trying to understand, using as an example Chevy Chase Library. With the small volume of books being checked out, are you suggesting that maybe you eliminate all the books there since there's so few? Was that one of your options?
Well, one idea I mentioned, really focusing on children's services, and if we
removing the books,
and by keeping the children's books there, and if we were to consider the option of retrofitting the building, so to speak, for
that's
rental
what I want
opportunities.
To speak to. So you're eliminating most of the adult books and keeping the children.
We would eliminate a good portion of the adult books, yeah.
And that opens up space by eliminating most of the books.
And I will say, that the books at Chevy Chase, not the children's books, but the adult books, are the most pristine books in our library system because they're really not used. A lot of them are out of date, and it wouldn't impact service to remove the majority of them.
What I was leading to, as you said, there's different needs at different libraries. Chevy Chase is way up in Chevy Chase Canyon, and public, like in that area, always looking for like a community center. You're talking about, in essence, turning a library into more of a community center for more activities. Maybe computers, maybe little children's books, parties, things. Maybe you can even put in a coffee machine or something where parents can go after work, go up to this common area, which to me would seem to be quite a nice thing to do. The library's still there, but the services at that library fit the locale. Same as you mentioned, some of the other libraries, more senior, tailoring them to the needs. Now, if you turn Chevy Chase into what you're talking about, is that one of the options? You know, when I've said put in a coffee machine and a space where people can come in, like you do down at Borders or something?
I mean, my vision, libraries have evolved, tremendously over just even in the last 10 years. And my vision of a library today is not just a place to check out books or read a book. My vision for the library is as a civic institution, a gathering place, a place where people can come and have a cup of coffee, can meet their friends, do all the things that all of you are describing. So, yeah, I mean, that model would not only apply to Chevy Chase, but all our branches.
Because reversible true, you go to Border and they bring in the coffee. You know, the books have some coffee or whatever, so we should be doing the same thing to draw them in.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, we actually didn't used to allow coffee or any refreshments in the Central Library, and then we said we want to be more of a civic gathering place and be more like Borders and Barnes & Noble, so we started doing that. Well, unfortunately, with the economy and the budget cuts, our custodial staff has been reduced. As a result, the food that's being brought in the library has not been a benefit because of the inability for cleaning up to the point where we want to clean up. So we ceased that policy at the Central Library.
But in good times, that would come back.
And in good times, that will come back. But right now, we're stretched to the limit.
So what do you, if you did what I was talking about at Chevy Chase, tailor it that way, retrofit, do the different things, is that one of the two options that are on here, or is that a blend?
It'd be a blend, yeah.
So what kind of cost reduction? I know, putting you on the spot. Off the top of your head, if you went that way, there's reductions because the books, maybe staffing, whatever. Do you realize some savings going that way?
Probably not. I mean, probably that's factored in. I mean, are you talking about cost savings related to?
Well, you're taking out the books except for the children's. So you're serving the public in a different way, more as a community center with a person or two in there.
And that's the difference between my $55,000 proposal and my $30,000 proposal.
55 being you have
Being almost status quo, but some of the changes that I suggested, the $30,000, we would want to rely more on revenue generation, so we probably would move forward if we could with.
I see. So less reduction if you tried to institute some of the new ways of generating revenue, which would be
Right.
cost offsetting, hopefully.
Long term, not short term, long term.
Long term.
Yeah.
And how many days is it open a week now?
Right now it's 3 days a week, 18 hours. But one of the days, Monday, is not heavily used at all. It could be as time progresses and people learn more and more about the library and we offer more services if we get to that point.
Do you have statistics on daily usage of
Yeah.
which days are the peak days?
Yeah, evenings and Saturdays are the peak times.
So is there a way to structure it that way?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would do if I reduced hours, is I would focus on Saturdays, probably put more.
Open at 6 or something,
Right.
and then the weekends.
I mean, it's a working community, so people come after work,
That's what
they
I
come
mean.
on weekends, so,
To get the kids, and let's go up to the library, and
Right,
you can get on the computer or something.
right.
So you could save, that one hasn't been proposed yet, right?
Yeah, that's in the 30,000 proposal,
That's the third
the option one.
of option one.
Yes.
Okay, because seems a logical way to go. Because you're feeding the community better. We know how much the people in Chevy Chase Canyon want to keep that library. But it becomes more of a community gathering place,
Yeah.
and saving cost seems to be a good way to go.
I mean, it's like anything. The more you're open, if we were open 5 days a week at Chevy Chase, the use would increase because we would have a consistent pattern of open hours. Right now, it's a little inconsistent with 3 days,
But this
Monday.
the economy is driving all this. That's why we're sitting
Right.
here. So
Right,
you know where you can go when the economy turns.
Right.
For now, what do you do?
right.
Okay.
Ms. Friedman.
Sort of interesting timing because yesterday after our budget meeting, we had a group of delegates from Korea come, and they were talking about this sort of city of the future they're building, this huge investment. I think they're putting the entire U.S. stimulus budget into one city, and they were talking about how they're building these amazing buildings. But what was interesting was they didn't talk about building retail. They talked about building research and development, building universities, how much money they're spending on educating their people, on providing recreation for their people, because they know that that's what's going to ultimately make their country successful in the long run. And we have had a real lack of that understanding, I think, in this country. And I don't want to make a big leap, but maybe that's a little bit why we are where we are. I agree with Mr. Draymond. I think that you're the one department that, well, maybe not the only one, but you're a department that I think that some of these cuts are going too deep. I appreciate the work that you've done already. It seems like you've really looked at the operations of your department, have made a serious attempt to make it more efficient, to look at the positions, to reevaluate the positions that you really need, that are essential, maybe something else, new positions you need, and maybe what you don't need. But in terms of cutting back library hours, turning libraries into community centers, or centralizing it, I wouldn't be for that at all, ever. Having Chevy Chase focus as a children's library, I think that could be a great idea if that's the usage up there. I hear a lot of complaints from young mothers that they don't have a place to take their little kids that's really dedicated to children in Glendale. So maybe there's an opportunity to service those two needs there while also keeping it open as a library. I think it's good to be looking at some of the revenue generating ideas. In a great world, we wouldn't have to do it, but it seems like a less painful way to keep some funding coming in. So film permitting, if you don't have to close the library, if it just makes it a little more inconvenient, I think that given that it's not the old library where it has to be completely silent, I think that we could live with that. Selling coffee, letting a Starbucks open in the central library, I don't know, but I think looking at some of those models is something that I would encourage you. Do you have any idea of what you could anticipate in filming if you were to really open the libraries up to that?
We were anticipating, I mean, we were thinking, okay, if we did 10 Criminal Minds in a year, we could make $30,000, and actually more than that, because I'm suggesting a higher fee than the $3,000 that we paid them the first time around. And I'd like to. I mean, and the reason that I would like to charge a higher fee at libraries is, number one, most libraries don't allow their venues to be used, and secondly, it is a disruption factor. Although when we did Criminal Minds, it was sort of like, ooh, this is really cool from the people that use our libraries. But
boy, are there going to be some great quotes out of this.
Okay, so that's could be a great opportunity. Is there any way that is there any opportunity with the stimulus money and that's going to the workforce to use some of that for your literacy program, since that you would think that it would tie in with workforce development?
We actually have already had a meeting with Madeline Blake and Community Development at the VJC Verdugo Job Center to talk about collaborative programming. I mean, my vision and Madeline's vision is to make the library, in a sense, a satellite of the VJC, where we would increase our job resources. We have job resources now, but we would increase our job resources using some of the stimulus money, and we would share our resources through the internet, through the web pages, and also collaborative efforts between staff. So yeah, we're putting together a package as we speak of proposals for Madeline.
Perfect. Now, the central library upgrade that you were talking about, is that coming out of your budget or out of Public Works?
We currently have some money in CIP to move the two entrances, or move our entrance from the east side of the building to the north and south side of the building. We have some money to move the little HVAC building.
So that wouldn't be under your proposal. That's still, you're not taking money out of that? Or?
No, it's part of the capital improvement
Yeah.
program.
Okay.
So.
And in terms of volunteer opportunities, I met with you a while back, and I understand that when you use volunteers, you have to realize that they're not always going to show up, and they're not as reliable as having employees. But is there any more opportunity to use volunteers, even for things like programming, books being read to children, that sort of thing, that might help engage people in the library, but also take some of the burden off of having to pay for these programs?
Yeah, we actually have. I mean, yes, there are issues related with volunteers in terms of training, and people don't sometimes stay as long as you'd like, but we have a very active volunteer program. I mean, our Friends of the Library, they run our book nook, our bookstore. Our teen librarian has a teen council,
I realize that.
Lots of things.
I'm just wondering if that can be utilized even more to help with some of the positions that you're eliminating.
It can be, but I think right now, I mean, it's difficult to find volunteers. People aren't volunteering as much as they used to. But yes, that's something that we'll always look for.
Okay. And my other concern, and you mentioned it a little bit, is security at the Central Library, because I know that it's up to you to keep the building secure, and if it does get out of hand, people aren't going to want to go there. So we have to obviously keep a comfortable environment for people, and a safe environment for people, especially with children. So for that reason, and for what I said before, I would agree with Councilmember Draymond that I wouldn't want to cut any more than your lower proposal for cuts, and if there was a way to find money to restore some of what you've lost, I would be willing to do that.
Mr. Casero, may I ask one question?
Go ahead.
Mr. Starbird, we're seeing each department incrementally, and like library, finding out the impacts. We're talking about cutting less or more. Down the line, we'll be having a study session where then we put all the departments together, and we can pick and choose. Like if we want to take less from libraries, we'll take more from another department based on what we're hearing in these briefings. Is that the follow-on from all
Yes.
these?
Yes. In fact, as you did last year, in fact, I pulled my copy out today. I've pulled it out many times in the past year. From the last study session last year, you had a list. Every department, every individual cut with a brief description of the program. As you recall, you all went through to department by department, and two departments in particular. You restored, and you had votes on every item. You restored some. You didn't have support for restoring others. I expect we will do that same thing when we conclude these department presentations. So you'll get everything they presented to you back in a table, listed and itemized, and what we'll probably do is list even the 2.5% in some areas, because to the extent that you don't reduce one area, you may want to reduce another area more. We will include those as well.
Good.
Now, I'm thinking we'll get that table to you before the end. In fact, we'll put that together as soon as we can, so you'll have it before we get done with all of the departments.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, for myself, I think the decentralized branch model is the best bet, except especially for a city as large as Glendale. I think having the individual branch libraries works real well, but I do agree with you. They have to be sort of tailored to the usage. An older population at Casa Verdugo, perhaps, and what you mentioned at Chevy Chase sounds like a plan, as I say. I hope you don't introduce any mixed drinks or anything like that. I think it doesn't go past
No, that would
coffee.
be great revenue.
Won't turn it into a lounge.
Yeah, the markup.
We're not looking for a lounge up there.
Maybe just wine and beer?
I do think a library foundation is absolutely the way to go. I think over time and fairly quickly, I believe you'll begin to realize some revenues as people become aware of it and there's more civic participation. I assume it might even help with certain grants and foundation money. So I'm also very leery about cutting your department any more than is necessary. I just think you do a good job. It's a very important service, so we have to do everything that we can to keep you operating at ultimately what becomes an efficient level. I think at a certain point then it isn't efficient. And then finally, in terms of the police program that was mentioned, I differentiate that program because those are at-risk youth that are being dealt with and have been for many, many years. Do you have any outreach to at-risk type of young people? How do you?
Our literacy program has a component in it that reaches out to children who are at risk because of limited language skills. Right now there's a program that's going on at the Pacific Park Branch Library. It's an incredible program that the school has selected a number of kids, I think 20 kids, who are participating in the program.
Is that funded out of your general revenues?
No, that's from our state grant funding. Our teen services librarian works with senior moment. What's the school? I'm sorry. Daily, thank you. With Daily School, we do regular programming with Daily School.
And then your outreach person, how do you envision that? What does that person do?
It's a library assistant position, which is a paraprofessional position, and right now we have someone doing it on a part-time basis. And so they're doing computer classes in Armenian. They're doing programming. We've had several authors from the Armenian community come and present. There's she's reaching out to different organizations in the community and making them more aware of library services. And she's doing a fine job on a part-time basis, but I'd like to have her working, or whoever gets the job, on a full-time basis.
How large is the Armenian language book?
It's 7,000, yeah. That's what I thought. It's between 7,000 and 8,000. It's the second largest international language collection, the first being Spanish language, which I think is about 12,000 items.
And the 7,000 are in the Central Library?
The majority of those are in the Central Library. Yeah, we've really focused our international collection at Central. But, Adams Square has, relatively speaking, a fairly good-sized collection. Pacific Park has a collection, but Central has most of the books.
Okay, those are the only questions I have. Any other, Mr. Draymond?
Yeah, thank you for raising the point again, Mr. Mayor Quintero, about the equestrian program and the boxing program through the police department that are for at-risk youth. One thing that I'm going to be really looking closely at as we go through this is the juxtaposition of things that don't need to be that we're trying to set up as mutually exclusive and so on. We don't need to choose between those programs and these programs. My point was that I know, just as last time, when it comes time to justify those costs, what we'll be hearing is they're essential to youth in our city, whether it is at-risk youth or the vast majority of the children of people who pay taxes in this city. And I'm not going to pit one against the other. We need both. But thank you for making the clarification. But there is one distinction, and that is in those programs, we're paying the city personnel overtime to operate them, and we're not doing that with the libraries. So that is a distinction. And it's not to say we shouldn't. I agree with you. But let's just be clear on it.
Well, but once again, that program for years and years has focused on at-risk youth, and they are programs that have succeeded without a question. So when you talk, we have a number of different budget items coming up here. When you specifically mention that program, I can't help but react. Because
well, and Mr. Quintero, you're entitled to react.
Been around
and so am I. I don't care if it's been around 200 years. The bottom line is they are both dealing with our children, and they are equally important. And they are equally, I don't know if they're equally, but they are certainly both successful programs. I'm not suggesting that we jettison one, but to talk about, to raise it as though somehow it mitigates against this, I just don't buy that. So?
Well, you're the one that raised the issue.
You bet I did. You bet I did. You bet I did, because we have a history on this dais.
Raised it again today.
That's right, and I'll raise it again and again, because we have a history on this dais so far in the last 2 years of saying, well, that relates to youth. It relates to youth that would be on the street otherwise. Now, when Mr. Zern gets up to speak, I doubt he's going to be talking to us about programs within his department that deal with keeping youth off the street. I mention that program because it does.
Well, I don't understand whatever.
I sing again, Madam Librarian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve is probably quickly trying to figure out how he can relate streets to youth right now.
Well, they're the things we keep youth off of.
Well, actually, Steve's responsibility is the streets.
Keeping it clean.
Potholes, so the bicycles don't go through them and fall and hurt.
His management services. I did have one.
Stress the correlation.
If I could, as management services is preparing, there will be with some departments a bit of a theme, a similar type of action that was a cost reduction. That was transferring staff that is associated with the capital improvement program into the capital improvement program to pay their salaries. We actually haven't, as of yet, mentioned any implications to that. Traditionally, we have charged the majority of the staff associated with the capital improvement programs to the capital improvement. On the other hand, departments have tried to balance maintaining some of that staff in the general fund just so that the majority of the money could, in fact, go to the project and not to staff costs. So across the board, in moving it out of the general fund to the capital program, which is appropriate, there is an implication, though, and that'll be consistent for all the departments. We're not increasing the capital improvement program to accommodate that. That means, in the end, there will be a slightly diminished amount that would actually be available for the project itself. It instead will need to provide for the staff. So just across the board, that and all Parks and Recreation, Public Works, and Library are the three that, in particular, that you'll see that in. But there is at least a minor impact to the project. Ability to do the projects we do. Next up, Yasmin Beers from Management Services.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I will do the Management Services overview. I won't read you the mission statement or the core services, but just to highlight the core services, we provide citywide policy implementation and overall management oversight under the guidance of the City Council. The sections of responsibility, basically policy implementation, which is the council directives that come forward and the implementation that occurs with the different departments, operational oversight, budget oversight, audit operations, public information office, community relations, Commission on the Status of Women, and intergovernmental relations, which includes Southern California Association of Governments, state and federal lobbying efforts, and Arroyo Verdugo cities. The service level changes going into the 2008-2009 fiscal year, the actions that we took to balance the 08-09 budget, we implemented a 5% total reduction, which resulted in $186,500 cut to the department's budget. And it was in a myriad of different areas, to include hourly wages, contractual services, travel, training, membership and dues, and miscellaneous M&O, to include office supplies, general supplies. Service level changes in 8-9. There was further mid-year adjustments that occurred March 3rd, and we implemented another 3.9% for a total reduction resulting in $126,800 to the department's budget. And this was the elimination of one vacant position in our internal audit section, and that was the principal internal auditor. And this resulted in a 20% reduction in the section's ability to conduct internal audits. The number of audits per year that our audit section does is approximately 45 to 50 audits per year. And so they will have to basically reprioritize and really try to figure out which ones are the most priority for them to be able to move forward with. For a total reduction for the 2008-2009 fiscal year, which equaled $312,500. This is an overview of all of our accounts, funds within management services. We have GTV6 and graphics highlighted in this area. Graphics, if I can touch on, which is the last one initially, as discussed by the finance director yesterday, graphics was housed in administrative services, and as of the 9-10 budget, will be consolidated under our public information office within the management services department. And if I can touch on GTV6 for a moment, we receive PEG fees on an annual basis, and the PEG fees that we receive on a calendar year basis is about $450,000 to $500,000 a year. There is a 2% PEG fee that we receive from both Charter and AT&T, and Glendale receives, of that 2%, 1.45%. GUSD and GCC receive 0.55% of that 2%. Currently, the PEG fees are used for operational purposes as well as capital expenditures. In 2006, state law was changed by AB 2987, which defers to federal laws governing PEG fees. And this means that PEG fees can only be used for capital expenditures. And during this period, we were in negotiations, as you know, with Charter to see if we were able to continue to utilize the PEG fees the way that we were. This has not been successful, unfortunately. Therefore, PEG fees can only be used for capital expenditures. Due to these developments, staff is recommending that GTV6 operations be transferred to the general fund, and through this process we would set up a mechanism for the general fund to be paid back the PEG fees through a public financing authority. In essence, we are going to capitalize on our past expenditures, which include the renovation of the GTV6 studios, as well as the assets that we have, the equipment that the city owns. The city would enter into a lease agreement with the Public Financing Authority. Right now, we do have a consultant who is an appraiser who is working on evaluating the GTV6 space and assets to be able to come back to us and give us his review. And that should be completed within the next 2 weeks. In the special revenue fund currently, where PEG fees have been going, we have a fund balance of approximately $500,000. Based on the PEG fees that we receive, which is $450,000 to $500,000 in any given year, within the next 2 to 3 years, we would be drawing down on our fund balance. And we would then need to, since we're moving GTV6 to the general fund, we would need to basically subsidize up to about $200,000 to be able to maintain the current operations that we have. To close this gap, staff is working on some options to bring back to council for your review to see if we can minimize the gap as much as we possibly can. Moving on to proposed service level changes in 910, an additional 3.6% or $117,900 has been identified for us. In essence, is going to be a 7.5% reduction. We're already there because of some of the changes that we are implementing. So we have exhausted our 5% and we're already into the 7.5%, which is transferring one filled position, which is Lana Haddad's position. Lana has accepted a position with Glendale Water and Power. Eliminating that vacant position as of July 1st within our office, and existing staff would then assume the responsibility of the eliminated position. The implications regarding this is going to be, we're going to be, of course, down one person in our office. And Lana did Commission on the Status of Women work, as well as special projects and some budgetary help as well. The existing staff, Christine Babumian, currently handles service requests, community requests that come forward on behalf of the mayor, the city council, and the city, and she will continue to work under that guidance, as well as the new staff person to the CSW. So there's going to be some changes in terms of the levels of service that we're going to be providing, so that all of us understand. In the past, when service requests came in, maybe they were turned around within a 24 to 48 hour period. We may see a bit of a lag with that. So it might be 48 to 72 hours versus 24 to 48 hours. And if we had to implement the 7.5%, we would have to reduce another about $12,000 within the M&O budget. That has not been implemented because we're not quite there yet. The other issue is downsizing and consolidating graphics section into the public information function. The positive implications for this, of course, is the mission is information within the section, and so it would be all under the same umbrella, which would be nice. The downside is that the reduction in staffing levels would be significant in this area. We would have 2 retirements occurring, so we would be going from people who are working on graphics-related issues from 3.5 staff members to 1.5 staff members. So there's going to be a downside as well for that. And individual departments would have to take on the responsibility of some quality control. Future challenges and impacts for management services and citywide issues, future budget planning citywide, cost containment and consolidations, as Mr. McFall mentioned yesterday, consolidation of graphics, as we have mentioned earlier. We'd like to really look at graphics, public information, special events, and GTV6, and looking at a community relations section as a whole. Maintaining existing service levels, as mentioned before, and identifying alternate funding sources for GTV6 to help reduce the gap of the general fund for operations of GTV6. With that, Mr. Mayor, are there any questions?
I have a quick question before I turn it over. You need to re-explain. Obviously, we all know that the PEG fees have pretty much come to an end. However, you say that we can continue to receive some PEG fees for capital expenditures, and then you talked about a public financing authority lease agreement, and then you talked about redoing the Channel 6 whatever, what's it called? It's not an office.
The studio?
Studio, excuse me, the Channel 6 studio.
The studio has already been renovated. What the appraiser is currently doing is going back to see what the value of the studio is,
okay.
Along with all of the renovation that has occurred, and to add to that the assets that we own as the city for GTV6 operations. Once he's able to come up with that dollar amount through the Public Financing Authority, and jump in when any of you would like, through that process, What we would be able to do is basically utilize the PEG fees as they come through, as they do on a calendar year basis, to a tune of about $500,000 yearly from Charter and AT&T. That $500,000 would go to the Public Financing Authority. Then the Public Financing Authority, through a lease agreement with the City of Glendale, would pay back the city the amount. Now, the part of this that we all have to understand is that this would be only a finite amount of years. So whether it's going to be 5 years or 9 years, dependent upon the number that the appraiser comes up with and how we decide how long we're going to be able to drag this out, that would be an option for us to be able to utilize the PEG fees really for operational necessity and not have $500,000 come in on an annual basis for capital expenditures that we do not need.
Right. Mr. Weaver.
I remember the entire history of the creation on the status of Commission on Women. I know the emphasis was greatly put on us to put it into the city manager's office so it would have more clout as a commission. I'm very, very surprised to find out that that position had morphed into doing budget and other things, because I don't recall any of us being told that that position was created to do more than handle the status of Commission women. If it hadn't, I'm surprised it didn't come back to us to make it a part-time position and maybe get somebody to do the other work that's now going to be absorbed by the staff that's in there now. Maybe it'll be part-time, I don't know. So that was a surprise why we didn't know this. At least I didn't. Other thing, the special events has gone up by almost $28,000. Why?
Special events, as you know, is the Week of Remembrance, Unity Fest, Cesar Chavez, and we receive a certain number of amount of revenue on an annual basis. We are projecting that we're going to be receiving the $28,000 more in revenue, so we're asking for it to be appropriated at this time, and the anticipation is that that's how much we're going to be receiving in excess this coming year. So it's not an increase in anything that we're doing.
An increase in expenditures, it's an increase in revenue.
Yes.
Well, because I misunderstood this slide when you had it down there. Adopted budget, but that's income, not expenditures.
Correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Friedman.
The internal audits, do they typically increase efficiency to the point where you could consider them revenue generating?
Oh, absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, let me touch on that because I was going to comment on that once council was done. I'd like to have another opportunity to look at this recommendation on reduction. I have been of the view, for as long as we've had internal audit, that they more than offset their cost. In fact, it's probably multiples of their cost. And I think in most years we could actually show direct dollar offsets. I'm thinking of times when on behalf of GWP, they have reviewed contracts and billings that have saved GWP literally the entire internal audit budget in one contract review. Not to mention the number of times that internal audit has come in to review programs that don't result in economic savings, but frankly I think have saved our bacon on programmatic issues. I also think back to the objective we have here of doing performance audits of all the operational areas in the upcoming year, and that responsibility is falling on internal audit. They have a vacant position. As a result, they offered it up. Frankly, I think we in Management Services need to go back and rethink that, because I think this would be false economy to look at reducing an internal audit position when those positions are used by every department and every fund, but particularly the general fund, to find cost savings, and frankly we'll need them to do the performance audits in the upcoming year. So, and that's not to say that we shouldn't produce the savings within Management Services. I think we should, but we should go back and relook at that position again and find a different way to accomplish this.
Internal audit's like an enterprise fund, isn't it?
Well, it is in many respects. I mean, I have frankly told Mr. Fox over the years that I'd be supportive of adding more positions if he just come forward with the economics to show how we might be able to use them and how he might be able to manage them. Because I really do think economically we more than recoup the entire cost of that operation every year, and that doesn't include the performance audits, the review of operations and programs that they do that frankly aren't on their work program, that they arise. I think of the situation we had several years ago with the Humane Society and their assistance in helping get through that, their review of the elections the past 2 years. We pull them out of what they do. We send their talented staff off to go do these special reviews, and it's tremendously valuable to us. So I hate to see their staff numbers drop, because I think we'll need them even more as we try to cope with a lot of the economic issues we have on the horizon. So I'd like to go back and have a do-over, at least on this component of it, find a way for management services to save this money while not taking it out of interim audit.
That was my question about that, so I'm glad to hear that you were following the same line of thought. The graphics department, did you look at the possibility of outsourcing graphics completely to see if that would save money?
Yes, we have. Do you want to touch on a little bit of graphics, since it's yours right now? I don't quite have it yet.
Part of the discussion on graphics was, and we talked to the executive team, it has been an in-house function. We have the opportunity with 2 of the staff members announcing their retirements next year. So we took the opportunity to look at how to best serve the departments, whether we downsize that. And frankly, a lot of the departments are already using outsourced for larger jobs and whatnot. It was felt that smaller departments still wanted to have some semblance of the graphics function with the downsizing. Larger jobs would be farmed out as they are now. So it was kind of a blend of the two. It will remain with one full-time graphics person, designer, and a part-time, and then a copy operator. And of course, then there's 2 folks that operate the mailroom, and they're kind of intertwined in some respects.
My suggestion would be to keep looking at that. It seems like a lot of people. I frankly was a little shocked when I came to City Hall at the amount of paper that's in my mailbox every morning. And I know that, it doesn't seem like maybe a lot on an individual basis, but when you add it all up, we've got the same report here that's on the screen. I mean, I know the public needs to have something to take home, but I'm getting piles like this, and I think if we start moving towards paperless, I would imagine there's money to be saved there. And it's like mountains of paper.
Welcome to City Hall.
We really agree with that, particularly on the paperless part. It is an enormous job moving all it around and printing it all. So we agree with that. Graphics a year ago was 6 positions, 6 full-time positions. Taking out the mail run part, graphics was 6 full-time positions. With this adjustment, it'd be down to now actually 1 full-time position and an hourly position. And what our thought is that we're going to need. We anticipate that we're now going to be doing virtually all of our major jobs on a contract basis. We're going to completely change our whole service model. We still need a person, though, to manage those contracts, to find the vendors, to do all that, as otherwise the departments are going to be doing that individually then, and we'll lose the benefit of being able to have a centralized contract to provide the mass services, because we do still do enormous amounts of printing on relatively complex jobs that does take a project coordinator. So your path is the path we think makes a lot of sense.
Okay, well, every employee in the city is on the same email system. There's no reason we should be getting an email about something and then a paper notice. It's ridiculous.
How many employees at GTV6?
GTV6 has 6.5 employees.
One more question.
Is the half here
Does
today?
Friedman go?
Half is part-time individual.
The position you're losing with Ms. Haddad, so does that mean the Commission for the Status of Women won't have a staff member dedicated to them?
They will. Christine Babumian, who's an administrative assistant in our office, will be and is in the transition of assuming those responsibilities.
So in terms of the special projects she was doing, I'm assuming that there's some grant writing, that sort of thing?
Ms. Haddad?
Yeah.
She did some grant writing for the Commission on the Status of Women, and Christine would take on those responsibilities.
Okay. And one other thing, I'm sure you've looked at this, but I would think that there are some political science graduate students that would intern in some of these.
Absolutely.
Some of these roles.
On an annual basis, we work with USC. They send us a letter on an annual basis asking to see if we're interested in utilizing interns, and we distribute that to not just our own office, but citywide, and there are departments who utilize interns from SC. And invariably, we get calls from different universities where students want to intern at no cost and want to spend their summer with us, and we've done that as well, and we continue to do that. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
Council never gets that notice about interns.
We will make sure that you get that
We've got
notice.
mountains of paperwork to
Sure.
go through. We need someone
right.
to summarize and paraphrase and
We can look at that.
As long as that's
absolutely.
all you have in mind.
speeches.
Mr. Mayor, I remember in '97, I wanted an unpaid assistant to help me with filing whatever. I ended up with a cartoon in the news press that I had these little L's whirling around. Of course, my colleagues at the time says no council member can have any assistance from part-time or students or anything. My argument was it's good on their resume. They're working in an office, they're not getting paid, but they're getting office experience, and they can put it on the resume. But see, it's a new decade, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
What's next, Mr.?
Well, that's a good point, Mr. Weaver. At some later time, sort of shifting to city council issues, I'd like to just review that policy and see if that's still a policy, because if that is the policy, I have violated it. I have some of my own staff helping me with city council issues and transportation issues. So,
It's no formal policy. It's just the way things were.
and we'll have our ethics commission.
I'm filing
look
an
into that
ethics.
as soon as we get to
I'm
that.
filing an ethics violation on you.
I would just point out, Mr. Mayor, I have been under the impression all this time that Mr. Weaver had elves in his office that were helping him.
Aw, shucks.
And
You've been snooping.
not only that, but as to Ms. Friedman's comment about the volume of paper, I absolutely agree. I'll just tell you right now, Ms. Friedman, what I do with mine is I bundle it and burn it in the fireplace of my hovel to stay warm during the winter. There was nothing, Mr. Mayor, in the management services section about cutting council salaries by 10%, which I figure might
just
save us
discussed
about
that.
$1,800 a year.
Yeah. That's about it.
I think we're the lowest paid staffers there
Yes,
are
the
already.
little gardener.
As we like to say, we're the only city employees that can qualify for our affordable housing.
I might add, too, the longer your meetings go, the less per hour you earn.
Yeah, but we get our money. But we get our money's worth out of you, Mr. Starbird.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Matt Doyle, Director of Human Resources, and I'll be going through the presentation on human resources. Our mission statement: to maximize the effectiveness, productivity, performance of Glendale's human resources through the development of a workplace environment which is responsive to the needs of the organization and its employees. Our core services include all employment services, including recruitment and testing, employee relations, benefits, training and development, employee safety, workers' compensation, and employee health services. We are also staff to the Glendale Civil Service Commission, which meets twice a month, which is entrusted with maintaining the merit system in our hiring and retention practices. The sections of responsibility for human resources include 5 major areas, 2 of which are general fund related. The other 3 are not. Human resources administration and training and development are both general fund accounts. Employee health services, workers' compensation, and occupational safety are non-general fund. They're part of the compensation insurance fund. The traditional functions of human resources are recruitment and testing, employee relations, labor negotiations, employee benefits, as well as we said, the Civil Service Commission. Our service level changes prior to this fiscal year involved reduction of approximately $101,000. One position eliminated. That was a mid-management human resources analyst 2 position. We have 2 vacant positions which are unfilled and will likely remain so for some time. One of those is a safety professional position, a safety services specialist. The other is a clerical position which is staffed within our recruitment function. We do have one additional position unfilled for the majority of the fiscal year. This is a position within our benefits section vacancy we had, and the timing was very poor. That individual left right about the time when we were implementing hiring freezes, so we weren't able to fill that position, but we anticipate being able to do so, but probably at a lower classification. We've also experienced a reduction in our hourly wages, our M&O, including contractual services relative to legal services. That's occasionally we need legal advice from law firms that specialize in employment and labor relations. We've also been able to reduce our advertising and office supplies. And a lot of the reduction in advertising and office supply can correlate with reduction in recruitment activity. Additionally, we've experienced reduction in our citywide training program. We do have a very active, very robust training program. We try to do all of the mandatory programs, the harassment training programs, but a variety of other areas, including diversity, ADA sensitivity, and of course management development, and just the general training functions relating to computer training, customer service training, things like that. What we've done is reduce those to some degree and sort of scaled back on them, spread them out over a number of years versus trying to get them all done in the normal amount of time. This is a reflection of, again, all of the funds within human resources. The salary and benefits, we've seen a decrease through the efforts that we've made of $147,000. The M&O is showing a slight increase, but this is largely due to the adding of cost allocation expenses to our budget very recently. So, and those are isolated in the non-general fund areas. That was over $300,000 that was added to us. In our general fund account, again, which includes simply the human resources, the traditional human resources functions, as well as our training and development program, you see cuts in both salary and benefits and M&O amounting to approximately $113,000. For the 09-10 fiscal year, this is just a brief summary of what reductions took effect. Again, the downgrading of one position, and this is a position within our benefits section. As I said earlier, we experienced a vacancy right about the wrong time when all the economy was going down, and we are taking that position. It's a senior office specialist, and we're doing what I think a lot of departments are doing, is looking at refilling that at a lower level. Benefits is an area that requires some degree of knowledge, and essentially we've come to the conclusion that if we're going to have to train someone in our benefit procedures and our medical insurance plans and all that, we may as well hire someone in at the entry level versus a higher level, save a little money there. Additionally, we've reduced our hourly wages section, and essentially in the HR general fund area, I really am down to just one part-time position. This is a retired HR analyst who helps me on various projects, mainly special projects, certain investigations that need to be done on employment matters, as well as salary surveys when we do those. So I only have one person remaining. We also took similar further reductions to our M&O, including, again, further reductions in the outside legal services, our advertising, as well as our office supplies. One thing we are looking at is an analysis. Currently, we're looking at the analysis of our health services operation. It's one of those functions that is somewhat unique to the city of Glendale. Other other agencies contract that out, and we are currently determining the feasibility if that's even worth considering. We're putting together an RFP just to explore what options might be available in that area. Looking at an additional 2.5% reduction within the HR budget, we are able to adapt to such an additional change, which would bring our total to a 7.5% reduction. And I'll leave a caveat with that. As long as the recruitment activity remains somewhat slower, we should be able to withstand that level of cut. If we ever get into the situation where we are given the green light to begin doing a lot more recruitments, then I will need to get that money back, particularly the advertising and things like office supplies, a lot of the things that are related to our recruitment. Additionally, vacant positions will remain frozen as well. So again, the difference between the 5% and the 7.5% reduction is not significant, at least in our case. But again, if we do ramp up our recruitment activity, it could have a serious impact on that. Human resources, the other funds, again, these are the non-general fund related components: employee health services, workers' comp, and occupational safety. We've been very diligent about going through some reductions. Mainly you see them in the salary and M&O areas. The reason we do show an increase, again, is due to that the added expense of the cost allocation, which was imposed upon these funds in particular. As far as future challenges and impacts for human resources, I would say continue to address the ongoing effects of the anticipated budget shortfalls on the employee population, including a lot of time spent looking at reorganizations, potential transfers, potential layoffs, and other efforts really designed to mitigate the need for further cuts. Additionally, continue to work in partnership with the employee associations on an ongoing basis on these budgetary challenges and the effects of those on the employee population. We don't anticipate this economic downturn and the current budget problems to be temporary. I see this going on for several years, and really it's going to be the responsibility of my department to make sure that employees are kept aware of what's going on, and that whatever impacts are going to be faced by our human resources are adequately communicated, and that we just try and maintain as much communication and information that's available, so it doesn't drive morale into the ground and it doesn't impact employee job performance. And the biggest impact of all of these cuts is largely going to be the fact that the remaining employees are going to be doing a lot more work, and we'll be seeing people take on additional assignments. People will be asked to be cross-trained and learn new things, and we may have situations where people think they're working out of their classification, and those are all impacts that we will have to deal with and face as we go on with this. Additionally, as far as future challenges and impacts, we will continue to examine the employee health, workers' comp, and occupational safety functions to ensure that those areas are being managed properly, and that we are getting the most cost-effective and efficient delivery of services there. Again, these are functions that in some other agencies are not handled in-house, and so they will always be, I would say, prime targets for people to look at contracting out potential. I personally think it's very important to have them internally, and there's a great benefit by having all of those functions internal. But again, it's something that we will continue to look at and monitor. Additional future challenges and impacts. We will work with the new health benefits insurance broker to help mitigate the rising costs of group health insurance. And I want to be clear, over the past fiscal year, my department, working along with our health benefits committee and our employee associations, went out and we did an extensive RFP on our health benefits, insurance, and brokerage services. It's been a long time since we had done that, and we ended up bringing in a firm that we believe will have a very, very effective means of dealing more effectively with our medical insurance carriers and making sure that we truly do get the best bang for our buck, our medical insurance costs. I won't say that we're going to see a reduction in any of those expenses, but our objective would be to help mitigate the increases that we see in our medical insurance rates. That is one area of the economy that I think the Council is well aware of. Medical costs continually outstrip the rate of inflation, and again, it's important that we as an organization spend a lot of money on medical benefits, and it's important that we continually look at that. And again, I believe with this new health insurance brokerage services that we will do better in that area. Additionally, my department will be concerned with a lot of the impacts of some of the things occurring at the state and federal level, particularly some of the mandates. Recently, we had as part of the federal stimulus program, a COBRA subsidy program, which kind of caught a lot of people off guard, to where we would now subsidize part of the COBRA expenses for employees who separate. Typically, when an employee separates, they're allowed to remain on the medical insurance plan, but they pay those costs out of their own pocket or whatever savings they have within their retiree health savings plan. We are now going to be compelled to subsidize 65% of those costs for people who separate. This is something brand new, and we're still learning more about it. There's other components of the economic stimulus program which are going to affect us. We've been in touch with Community Development and Housing Department. You talk about slowdown in our recruitment. They have somewhere in the neighborhood of 15, 16 positions that they will need to fill to meet the requirements of the economic stimulus program, which we are working on. We're doing those recruitments right now for Community Development Department. Other areas, unemployment insurance. In tough times, there's always efforts at the legislative level to extend unemployment insurance for longer periods of time. We also see at the state level potential changes in workers' comp legislation, and again at the federal level, we're always hearing about health care reform and things like that. And those are the types of things that we need to be on top of. Other challenges, again, filling vacant executive level positions. We have we anticipate two vacancies. One we will be filling. The other, I'm not sure within the community development area what's going to be done there, but those will have an impact on human resources. And again, the final bullet in this presentation, we talk about ensuring appropriate succession planning, utilizing our limited training funds to ensure that as we see people retire, leave this organization, that we have well-trained, well-developed people beneath them who are ready to step into managerial and supervisory roles. And again, we've done a lot in that area, and we continue to do so with our supervisory training academy and other programs like that, because that's the most important thing. We don't want to leave this organization poorly managed as people leave it. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Matt, can you talk about the Wellness Center issue?
Certainly.
The Wellness Center and what we would potentially save if we were working through one of our hospitals. Or not.
Yes. And it's kind of a misnomer to call it the Wellness Center. The name of the section is Employee Health Services, and what they do, they're responsible for really ensuring that the employees who work here are essentially fit for duty. With that regard, they do pre-placement physicals for all new employees. Everyone who gets hired here, except for council members, goes through a pre-placement physical to ensure that for whatever position they're hired in, whether it's a cop, firefighter, maintenance worker, office person, whatever, that they're capable of doing that from a physical standpoint. They're also responsible for what I would call regulatory exams, and these are exams that are mandated by Cal OSHA in order to work in certain areas, whether it's the power plant or certain respiratory type exams, hearing exams. These are things we have to do. There's a lot of people think that employee health is there, if somebody gets sick or a paper cut or something like that, they go over there. But we're talking about required examinations. They also manage our employee assistance program, which is a very important program when you have employees that have either personal problems or things that affect their ability to do their job. And there's also a mandatory component to the employee assistance program. If we have an employee who has test positive for drugs or alcohol or something like that, we would direct them on a mandatory basis to employee assistance. They also manage our Department of Transportation commercial driver's license program, which is any employee who is charged with driving a commercial vehicle throughout this organization, a truck, trash truck or whatever. They have to be put into a pool of commercial drivers, and they are subject to random drug testing. We conduct that random drug testing within our Employee Health Services office. Additionally, and this is a growing part of our job, has to do with dealing with our disabled and our work-restricted employees under both the federal ADA and the state of California Fair Employment and Housing Act. We are obligated to accommodate employees who have either disabilities or work restrictions and meet with them in what they call an interactive program and attempt to accommodate whatever restrictions they have, and work with the department and sort of as a go-between between the employee, the department, and their employee association, in making sure that we can get them back to work in a timely manner. On top of all those things, they do handle our wellness program, which is the things that we would do: basic health prevention, flu shot programs, health screenings to identify problems that people may be having, so they can get assistance, as well as other educational type programs that are available. In addition to all that, they do what we would call episodic care. Again, that would be if an employee is sick, rather than taking the 2 to 3 hours off to go to their doctor and sit in the doctor's office, they can go across the street, get treated, and either get sent home sick leave, or if they're well enough to come back to work, they'll come back to work. It's a very effective, very handy thing that's available to our employees. In addition to that, the episodic care, we do send some of our minor workers' comp cases to Employee Health Services. They are a center that can deal with that. So to answer your question, Mr. Draymond, I wanted to go through what they do and then answer your question about what potential we can have for outsourcing this. And there is a potential. There are medical offices, there are occupational medical centers at Glendale, Adventist, St. Joe's used to have one. I'm not sure if they still do, but certain components of these things, certainly the pre-placement physicals, the regulatory exams, we could in fact send some of those out. Some of the other areas would either need to continue to be handled internally. Talking about our general wellness program, our DOT commercial driver's license, we would either have to continue doing those internally or do a separate RFP for that particular function. But the thing we're working on right now in looking at this is that we're preparing RFPs to go out, and right now I believe we have 4 separate ones to address all of these areas, and we simply want to see what we can get out there in the open market, if there's a better way of providing these services.
Mr. Mayor, that's the only question I have, but I do want to ask that when we come back, or by the time we come back to this final list or whatever accounting, that we I'd like to have that information if we can, or some idea of what savings we might see by outsourcing some of this. There are large corporations that do this routinely. There are certain unions that do this kind of thing routinely. I mean, that outsource and so on. So I'd like to know a little more about that when we come back, and what kind of cost savings we might realize as a result of that.
The entire budget for employee health service, and unfortunately this includes a lease on a office building, is about $1 million.
$1 million.
Yes.
And then how about some of the other functions, workers' compensation? I know that's handled internally, and occupational safety and so forth. Is that something that you're also looking out in terms of contracting?
We plan to look in those areas. We have not gotten as far in those two areas as we have. And you know, it's a very sensitive thing. We have employees in these jobs, and to roll out something like this, we want to make sure that they're well aware of these things are being explored. So,
Mr. Starboard?
I was going to note on the Wellness Center, as Matt noted, he's preparing requests for proposals, and we'll bring those to you for review before those go out, and then, of course, the results of that when it comes back. And we expect that in relatively short order. Matt was noting to me today that they're putting the final touches on the RFPs, so I'll be reviewing them, and then we expect to get those out so we can have some sense of both the interest as well as the potential cost savings.
Mr. Najarian?
all right.
Matt, on page 4, you've downgraded one position, reduced hourly wages, unfilled 2 vacant positions, reduced M&O, legal services, and that's only a $96,000 savings?
Yes.
That seems a lot of reduction, not much dollar reduction. I mean, are those low-level, entry-level positions that are unfilled? My understanding
those positions are still in the budget, so we have not eliminated those, but they're just remaining unfilled.
Okay.
The cuts are mainly in the other.
Where does the 96?
I think we'd have to come
understand.
back, and you bring up a good point, because it gets a lot of nomenclature between us, but the city's practice, our practice is when we don't keep positions unfilled in budget form. We either we do by the way of the hiring freeze if we intend on keeping the position, but if it's a position that's going to be reduced, by practice we don't keep it on the books. The position is eliminated, and therefore we don't have to plan for the cost. So honestly, we need to go back and add those numbers up, because my reaction was actually similar. If we have one vacant position that's eliminated and then 2 positions being unfilled, there should be a larger dollar amount associated with that. So we need to revisit that.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We will let's take a break, and we'll reconvene at 12:20.
Mr. Mayor? Frank?
Okay, we're back from recess. We'll call the meeting to order. The 2009-2010 budget study session on May 13th. Mr. Starboard.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the next department, as he's standing there, is one of the largest in the city, if not the largest.
GWP.
Oh, so GWP has moved ahead of Public Works.
A little bigger, yes.
Well, second largest department in the city, and probably the department with the broadest breadth of operations, Public Works. Steve Zern.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for allowing me to present our budget. bear with me on the mouse here. This is our mission statement. This is not a new mission statement. You have it in front of you. I won't dwell too long on that. This shows the different divisions within the department. As Mr. Starbird said, our scope is pretty broad. We provide a number of services within those divisions. This is an overview of our core services. First up is just some of the infrastructure we maintain. Second paragraph there goes over some of the specific operations or specific functions that we perform within the department. Jumping right to what was we call our Phase 1 reductions in 2008, 2009, was a 5% reduction, totaled $1.6 million, a little over $1.6 million. It is made up primarily of the elimination of vacant positions, and you'll see the listing here. This is a broad range. It crosses several of those divisions that you previously saw. Not only did we limit this to obviously vacant positions, but also I'm trying to spread the pain, if you will, across the various operations. There is this one I'll just point out where we had the pesticide applicator position. We did retain half of that position's funding for contractual application of pesticides, which we still feel is necessary for the forestry operation. Continuing with the Phase 1 reductions, hourly wages, our outside plan check service contract was reduced. We reduced some of our sidewalk maintenance program. This is the in-house portion. We also have a significant portion that we do through the CIP. And then we shifted two fleet maintenance positions to enterprise funds. Again, this was our first reduction for 0809, and as you know, the fleet consolidation is now shifted into an internal service fund, so that has further been absorbed. Phase 2 reductions, as we're calling them, for a total of $1.2 million, just a little over $1.2 million. Again, an attempt to spread the positions. We have them in engineering, building and safety, maintenance services, and traffic engineering. The second bullet on the page, as was discussed, I think, in the introductory, and as you're aware, the project management staff and public works along with parks was shifted down into the CIP budget. These reductions here are what is essentially the additional 2.5% that would get us to the 7.5%. This adds up to another $543,000. Again, primarily made up of vacant positions. We have 4 here. We further reduced the outside contractual plan check services. We also, it says here reduced, the brand maintenance contract. We actually took a component of the brand maintenance contract and shifted it to an enterprise fund. We're able to compartmentalize the various functions. So the trash collection, litter pickup, we transfer to the refuse fund. This is just a recap of the different phases of the reductions for a total of just under $3.4 million. Here's what we're calling challenges and impacts of those reductions. Keep in mind, you're not just the 22 positions that I just recapped, but also with the hard hiring freeze continuing through this year and into next year, for me at this point, that's another 25 positions. So that's about 25% of the total Public Works General Fund workforce. So our service priorities and operational duties will be spread amongst existing staff. I'm not the only one that said that. My colleagues have said that. One aspect of this, where I say consolidation of duties, function, and management, there is a certain bright spot to this. It allows us to look internally at potential for us to consolidate and restructure some of our organization. And so there is a bit of a shining light in this process. However, most of this will be project teams, work groups, taking on more work, increasing the span of control of our management staff, especially line supervisors. We have a reduction of lead workers, which puts more of a burden on the line supervisors. What that then kind of begins to percolate down to is there will be just a general slowdown across the board. Some places more pronounced than others. Delays in us responding to requests. You'll see an increase in backlogs, whether those are or requests for permits, requests for service. To handle this, we will go to a priority system. So in responding to the various needs we have, whether they be the maintenance of the infrastructure, whether they be internal service requests from other departments, or regulatory assignments or obligations that we have, we'll go to the use of a priority system. So health and safety, number one on the list. Anything related to health and safety, any imminent dangers, hazards, we will respond to first. We'll move then to anything by law that we're required to do, any regulatory requirements or legal requirements we have. In our role as a regulator, we have a certain obligation to respond, and we will have to do that as well. Something I call quality of life, that's kind of a catch-all. Most quality of life issues that take priority are those that fall into the other categories, life safety, health, those kind of things. Finally, you'll get to what I call aesthetics, non-life-threatening, non-harmful, non-emergency type calls and requests for service that will get a lower priority and take longer for us to get to. I have here reduction in building and safety services commensurate with the reductions in building or requests for services and revenue. We are estimating that the building and safety revenue will be down about $2 million over our estimate. So, as I think council's aware, most council's aware, when several years ago we were looking at the fee structure, we were looking to create a operation that was full cost recovery, so that it paid for itself. Not quite an enterprise fund, but a fee-based operation where the services were covered financially by the fees that we charged. Well, that's a sword that cuts both ways. So now with $2 million less in revenue, obviously we look to cutting costs for the services provided. So that's why you'll see that. The other thing we have impacting us is a increase in our maintenance cycles, forestry, signing, striping, concrete, facilities, custodial, where we get around the city on our 44,000 trees in 7 years. It may go to 8, it may go to 9. 15 years for sidewalk repairs may stretch to 20. So custodial work, I think even you have recognized that we've already started in that vein. We don't pick trash up, non-food waste trash up but 2 days a week. We're focusing on bathroom cleaning, high public area cleaning. So that's already underway. And then the last one will be a reduction in our ability to assist other departments and divisions who ask for help. Whereas when they're in a pinch, and it's something I pride myself on, and our department's ability to help, we will continue to do everything we can to help others. But in some cases, we just won't have the capacity to do that. Whether it's somebody asking for some engineering service here, or traffic engineering service there, or a survey, or something like that, we just may not have the capacity to be able to do that based on our priorities. This is just a recap. This is the total department. So this is general and enterprise funds. So we are, overall for the upcoming year, projecting a $2.4 million decrease in all aspects of our operation, including capital projects. This is the general fund, segregated, for you to take a look at. Same, here we have salaries and benefits and our M&O costs, capital outlay, looking at an overall reduction of close to $2 million. Now, an added treat for you, since I have 4 large enterprise funds, I wanted to include those here and just quickly go through those and recap.
Side.
It just went right by. It's after lunch, I understand. It's a tough position. First is our transit fund. And here you'll see an overall decrease of $6.1 million. Let me point out that's a bit of an anomaly. You're not seeing a large capital project and a bus purchase that took place last year. So that skews the numbers. We're actually up slightly in this. We had a slight increase in our Beeline maintenance contract, and also because of the cost allocation program that's been spoke about before, we're incurring some additional M&O costs there. Parking fund, essentially the same thing. There's some cost allocation burden that we're picking up here. That is the majority of what the increase in this particular fund is. Sewer fund, primarily you're looking here at about almost a $4.2 million increase in projects. And those are just significant projects. Primarily, those are capital projects from the City of Los Angeles for Hyperion and LA Glendale water reclamation plant upgrades. Refuse fund, essentially the same thing. Cost allocation increases. We have a slight increase in capital outlay. But with some of these, as I said, the cost allocation, for the most part, we're holding the line. I'm not proposing to council this year that we raise refuse or sewer fees. And then just quickly go through some of the future issues that we're going to deal with. Some of these have already been touched on with you before. Some will be coming back very shortly. But continuing the expansion of Shoal Canyon landfill, pursuing alternative conversion technology. This is an alternative to landfilling. Zero waste policy for the future. At some point, regardless of the expansion, we won't have the landfill. And I think it's important for us to now begin looking at what's going to happen when that landfill isn't there. I think a zero waste policy, although very aggressive, is probably the way we want to go versus putting our stuff on a train and having it hauled to the desert for an exorbitant amount of money. In the wastewater, we face very similar issues for the future. We want to nail down and renegotiate the joint powers agreement with the City of LA to ensure that our LAG plant stays open and functioning, including all capital upgrades and enhancing the use, actually the production of reclaimed water. We have our new NPDES permit that will be coming. We don't know when, probably in the next 2 years or so. Construction of a new interceptor sewer line. This is a line that now serves most of the southern part of the city and dumps directly into LA, that goes to Hyperion and is below LAG. By investing this money, we can pick it up sooner, put it into LAG, and this is about a $12 million project with about a 5 or 6 year payback. To give you an idea of how much money we would save by not having to send this all the way down to El Segundo. And we're also installing a reclaimed water line at the Corporation Yard to use in all of our watering, street sweeping, and sewer cleaning activities. And then the transit fund, most of this you're familiar with. We're coming back to council with a line-by-line study, updated the short-range plan. We're pursuing Tri-City Transit or a semi-regional transit service, all in an effort to expand the Beeline and make it as effective, serving the highest number of people we can. And then in parking, our real challenge is trying to increase revenues. It's just an operation that has a very small fund balance and one that we need to look at overall our rate structure to try to build on increasing our revenue. With that, I'm available for any questions or comments.
Right.
Thank you for indulging me on the enterprise fund.
It was our pleasure. That's the kind of dessert that you were looking for. Weaver.
Were you here yesterday when a speaker spoke about the landfill, that our rates were just extraordinarily high and we should reduce them? Because they were. He says if I went to another landfill way out, was a Sunshine or whatever, Can you comment on what he was saying?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Weaver, I wish it was as simple as that. Quite frankly, in at least the sanitation district's landfill family, if you will, our rates are probably on the lower end. Pointy Hills and Whittier is about $38. Ours is $44. The rest of their landfills are 50 plus. I'm not sure, but the individual indicated that it was a facility in Sun Valley. There's a lot of recycling-based facilities, construction, demolition debris, green waste, and so forth, where you can get a better rate. But when it comes to dumping trash, there's not a whole lot of rates that are better than that. Plus, you're talking also about the travel time from landfill to landfill. I mean, obviously, you want to go out to Whittier for $38 a ton. It's going to cost you a lot more than that to haul it out there. So
You were talking $230 to dump.
And I can't speak exactly to what it was he was dumping, but I will tell you, it's the economy and the matter of that there's not as much disposal as there was previously. People are not throwing away. They're cutting down on what they buy. They're increasing what they consume, fully consume, and they're wasting a lot less.
Increasing our landfill life.
That's the one upside.
Mr. Starbird.
Well, Steve touched on it. I was going to comment that at Shoal Canyon, you can only dispose there if you are located within the waste shed, it's called, which means the immediate communities and area. And in fact, if you want to dispose there, whether you're an individual or a company, you've got to get a special card from the sanitation districts to go there. So the people that might be using Shoal would be people who are relatively close in. I assure you, and today, when commercial folks are looking at where to take waste to, travel time, personnel cost, fuel costs are a considerable portion of what they have to consider and where they're going to go. If you look at Sunshine or Puente Hills landfill, which is down in industry, believe me, the travel time, fuel cost, equipment cost, return routing to get back to the job again is going to far offset any difference between our local rate for the waste shed and what those other landfills might be charging. Other landfills will enter into contracts where they will give very, very deep discounts on their normal tipping fee. But if you're a weekend hauler, much like Mr. Kazazian was noting, he said he had 3 or 4 tons of waste, which is not an awful lot. To go to Puente Hills or Sunshine, they're going to be paying the through-the-gate full rate with no discounts, and after they include fuel costs, equipment costs, and their time, it's not going to make economic sense. Shoal continues to be a bargain.
I just wanted that addressed.
Mr. Najarian.
Steve, with the what we're hearing is that there's a decrease in waste production, household waste. Are there any savings that can be found in biweekly pickups? Or is that...
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Najarian, that is not something that we'd ever even looked at, but I can, there's a sanitary health and safety factor about removing garbage from folks, and what we offer residents is a smaller container, so that for a discounted rate, if they are producing less refuse, they can get a smaller container, and that in turn may be an incentive in these particular times. Storing the waste at home for a couple of weeks, I can tell you, is probably not going to go over very well. And I'm not sure, just off the top of my head, how we would structure the operation and the collection in order to actually realize some real savings on that. I think the greatest benefit for us is what Mr. Weaver mentioned, is by default we're saving landfill, we're extending the life of the landfill. As I said, people are disposing less, but they are still disposing. So it's not something we looked at. Like I said, quite frankly, I wouldn't even know where to start, but certainly something, maybe there's a way for us to look at recyclable collection, for instance, is a different way. Because we're actually producing less recyclables, too. People are actually redeeming their own recyclables a lot more than they used to. Prices are down, but the overall amount that we're collecting is also down. The only thing remaining constant is green waste.
Keep growing. Ms. Friedman.
Just a couple questions. So in this proposed budget, you're not proposing cutting back on B-line transportation. Is there a plan, any built-in plan in that to, as you do your study, to increase
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Friedman, what the our goal is, and absolutely, that's an enterprise fund or a special revenue fund, quite frankly, that's different than the general fund. So no, there is no proposed reductions there. What we have is a finite amount of money through Proposition A and C and now Measure R monies to put into the system. We have a lot more demand for service, additional service, than we have the resources to be able to provide that. But as has been pointed out, in many cases, we may be providing service to an area that really isn't using it. So, are we providing it to the greatest, those in greatest need or greatest desire to have it? So, this line-by-line study was to go through our entire operation and see exactly where we are underutilized and where we have potential to move those areas into certain sectors of the city where there's a greater demand. I will say, because it's been used, the far northern part of the city, for instance, where there's a built-up demand for service in that part. We've talked about even the potential to have what I call specialized service, whether it's running a shuttle-type service, a dedicated service up and down the Central Business District on Brand, running something along Honolulu in the Montrose Shopping Park area in the northern part of the city. We had talked about a recreational shuttle that would provide direct service to the various parks and other recreational facilities in the city that children and kids and adolescents could jump on to get a ride to a ballpark, a park, a swimming pool, whatever the case may be. So when that study comes back, what my hope is, and with that study will be also a rate study, a fare study, because I think it's time for us to look at how we might be able to generate additional revenue to, again, provide more service. But anyways, my hope is to come back and say, here's what we found. What would council like us to do? Would you like us to move in this direction, add service here, and so forth?
My next question is about waste to energy and sort of where we are with that. As you know, I met with a waste to energy provider the other day, and one of the interesting things he said was that if you can have an accepted bid by next year, there's quite a lot of federal stimulus money that's set aside for waste to energy that probably won't be there in 2011, but would be there in 2010. So I'm wondering how quickly you think we could move and whether trying to aim towards getting something going to take advantage of that is possible.
Well, Councilmember Friedman, where we are to this point is the council we had a presentation by Los Angeles County Public Works Department and their efforts to move forward with what I'll call pilot programs for waste conversion technology. They were looking for partners and supporters, and the council overwhelmingly offered their support and the potential for the city of Glendale to be part of the pilot program or a pilot site, Shoal Canyon, for example. So we're still working with them on that. I have 3 vendors coming to see me that have been associated with them to talk about the potential for using Shoal Canyon. The gentleman that you met with, I'm also trying to set up a meeting with him and talk. I think at this point, to answer your question, my hope would be if we could put together something in the way of a feasibility study, at least to try to capture some of that money, so we could see what the best technology for us to use is. I mean, the potential is much greater today than it's ever been. With the economy, with landfills drying up across the country, states, and a lot of times California is an exception to this, unfortunately, states are beginning to relax and put together incentives for putting these kind of facilities together. The federal government is loosening up. Our hope is that we can get the state legislature in Sacramento to do the same, and our air quality areas to do the same. But the potential is fantastic for a gasification, for instance, where we could burn the trash and create a syngas, high hydrogen level gas that could run a turbine and create electricity, clean electricity, or even it's such a high quality it could possibly run vehicles and equipment. So that was a long answer. You probably wanted the short answer, but we are going forward. I'm trying to get a hold of these companies and talk to them right away, and then look to see if at a minimum we could get together some kind of a plan for a feasibility study where we capitalize on some of that available monies.
And my last is a comment. Sorry.
Let me just follow up on that. I was going to ask the same question. How tied are we, and I'll ask the city attorney also, how tied are we to Los Angeles County? We approved that feasibility study, et cetera, but is the landfill, the contract we have for the county, can we sort of do our thing at that landfill, or do we always have to go under LA County?
Go ahead, Mr. Zern.
Mr. Mayor, my sense has been, and when we've explored other options for the use of that landfill, is we have always gone in with the fact that that's 85%, 84.6% ours. We want to develop a project. The JPA calls for certain cost sharing and also profit or revenue sharing with the other owners of the site, being LA County and Edison. We've always just said, okay, we'd be willing to honor that or sit down in a separate agreement, but at a minimum honor that. So if you're 10% landowner, whatever project we put up there, we would share that with you or have a new agreement. But we've never let the agreement prohibit us or be a roadblock to trying to develop something.
Very good to know. Ms. Friedman.
My last is more of a comment to the rest of the board, which is that I would be very willing to look at some of our capital projects that we have planned to see if they're really what we want right now to be spending our money on. And the one that pops into my head without knowing a lot about it would be the Colorado Street widening, continuing that, whether that's something we really want to pursue right now, or I think we should at least have that discussion, given that that's over $3 million.
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm sure at some point we'll be talking specifically about the CIP. The only thing I'll say to this point is, please don't get completely caught up in the term widening. Widening is one aspect. There's a basic maintenance that street needs. If it's a desire of the council to forego the widening, that's fine. Same with Central. In fact, for your information, I've taken the widening off of Central. It's just, I don't think, for the cost and the benefit, it doesn't add up. And I think that we can continue with that street as it is in its current form, but it does need some new asphalt, it does need some new concrete. So from a strictly maintenance standpoint, I would pursue that. The widening, and I know, Ms. Friedman, we've had a conversation before, if we wanted to talk about in enhancements in aesthetics even for medians or other kind of things like that. So the widening, I'm certainly not married to. I just think the amount of capacity that we have, in some cases, it may benefit if you can get a dedicated right turn lane or something like that. I know some of the traffic engineers will probably kill me. But I think overall, if we focus back on upgrading the condition of the street, first and foremost, and then talk about expansion as a secondary issue, that would be my only request of you. But I agree, the widenings aren't essential, but there are certain maintenance requirements that take precedent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for raising the issue, Councilmember Friedman, because that was one of the items on the first day that we had said we wanted to hear a little more about. And I know we'll talk more about that when we get to capital improvement. What I'm going to need, though, is exactly what you're saying, Mr. Zern. I'm going to need to know what the cost differences are between the kind of maintenance you're describing and an expansion, so we know what the potential savings would be. And by the way, it isn't, I don't know if it's just me, but I think it's others as well who have the concern. It is not just the cost, it's also whether or not it is even necessarily the right thing to do in terms of the expansion portion of it, in terms of what those stretches of Colorado Boulevard should be, what we're trying to accomplish, and the direction that other cities are moving in terms of the kind of mix of business that's there and what kind of traffic flow is best for those businesses, whether creating a wide, high-speed moving thoroughfare is best for smaller business or not. And I don't know. I mean, this is what we'll get into. But in any case, I just wanted you to know it wasn't just about the expense of the expansion, but also the concept of it to begin with.
No, I fully understand and agree, Mr. Draymond. In fact, that's exactly the point that I approached Central with my staff was there's an obvious cost difference, but if there's a benefit, as I said, that outweighed that cost, then it's something I could propose. To me, I don't think the additional capacity serves any great purpose. I don't think it's going, for some of you who've been around, know the language of the traffic engineer. Does it get us from, where does it get us? From F to F plus? Or do we move into an E and that's a level of service? Is it really getting us, something in the sense of mobility
And then lastly,
and movement?
And lastly, one issue still related to that is also in this economy, and businesses are struggling. I want to be very careful about how we phase those projects in, whether it's a maintenance issue or an expansion. Glen Oaks would be an example of the level of complaints that I'm sure other council members received, concerns from local businesses and residents as well as to how much disruption at one time can be handled in this economy. This economy has created some concerns or some sensitivities beyond what we would normally see anyway. So, and then I didn't know whether whether Mayor Quintero was going to ask, or I should ask, about the children's at-risk programs through. Just kidding.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Draymond, we're looking at an adoption for work program.
Thank
so
you.
we are willing to adopt the youth of the city, and we will have plenty to keep them busy.
Put a broom in their hand.
Yes.
Mr. Weaver.
Steve, was the work on Colorado's related to slurry sealing to prevent entire replacement, or is it a combination of total street replacement and slurry?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Weaver, as I recall, that street has primarily a resurfacing. So it would be the grinding and the overlay.
So
right,
you don't have to do total replacement.
We have some areas where I would say we may need selective R&R, especially as you get closer to traveling east. As you get closer to Glendale, there's some areas that are pretty badly beaten up. But generally speaking, we were looking at a resurfacing, along with upgrades of all the concrete, so curb gutter and sidewalk in those areas. We also were looking at some tree enhancements, as you recall. We were looking at taking out some underperforming trees and then kind of matching the theme that had been developed on the eastern portion of Colorado without the Colorado red or orange, however you want to do it. Underperforming tree, Mr. Draymond.
I'm sorry.
I knew that.
Some of the language, I'm telling you, we're learning here.
I'm being too nice here. These are trees that are in distress or diseased and or dying.
Okay.
I knew we would hear this on the CIP.
Forming trees.
I just curious.
You like that?
Mr. Zern, I want to get back to Shoal Canyon.
Yes.
So we would perhaps have to share some of the profits from a project up there. However, we're not necessarily tied to L.A. County's proposed project. We could have that one going forward and have another one going forward.
That's correct. Mr.
Obviously, our project could use our own waste, whether
Correct.
it's residential, commercial.
What council approved was essentially no binding contract, no binding agreement, simply that a cooperative effort to work with the county to offer ourselves as a potential partner in a pilot program. Right. We have no binding obligation. If we find something better that's in the better interest of the city, we will pursue that.
And do you know how far along they are? They're talking to some of their vendors, but
they've put out their third addendum to their RFP. My sense is, and my understanding is their managers and staff have been back to every country where these are operating. I think more than once, but I think they're finally getting it down to where they have a location. They're trying to do a public-private partnership where there's a limited amount of investment by the county, allowing the individual to show what they can do. The companies want a certain amount of guarantee on the stock, the feed stock, whether it's 1,000 tons a day or something in that neighborhood. So I don't know all the details, but I think that's some of what's going back and forth. My understanding is by the end of the year, we should see some movement towards an agreement and beginning of citing a project.
Okay, well, I also think we should move forward on our own, keep working with the county, but move forward on our own. The sooner we get involved in this, the better. I mean, there is technology throughout the world that's being used that there's no question that it's working, and so we might as well explore it. And
I agree, and as I had stated in one of my comments, I use this zero-waste philosophy or policy. This conversion technology is integral to putting that into place. And I'm simplifying this, but generally it is, you extract every single thing you can from the waste stream and either reuse it, recycle it, divert it, and then whatever's left over, a very small amount, you put it into some conversion system, plasma arc burn, combustion system, or this gasification, which to me looks like a very, very interesting and potentially beneficial method to do it. And as I said, I've already talked with Mr. Linz from Water and Power about how Public Works and Water and Power can work on this, because that's an opportunity to create clean electricity. So I'm fully agree.
in terms of your building and service, building and safety, the reduction, you said $2 million less in revenues. Could you attach a percentage to that? I mean, are we down 60% in the permits, or?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, our original estimate was $5 million. We're down to $3 million, so you're looking at, yes, 40%.
We're down about 40-some%.
And I will tell you that when you look at the reductions I made, you'll see they're primarily made in contractual plan check and plan check positions, again, vacant positions. Interesting enough, the number of permits is actually slightly above last year to date. So the demand for inspection and some of the clerical services to process permits, these are smaller projects, mostly homeowners, small tenant improvements as people stay in their houses, decide to fix them up, fix that bathroom or kitchen, possibly add a pool. So the number of permits is actually stable. It's the size of the projects. We just aren't getting the large development projects. And when those come back, and I hope it's a when and not an if, those projects come back and the revenue goes back up, we have the opportunity then to inject more money into the budget to get those contractual services back and possibly even add staff if that's what we would decide to do. But at this time, it just makes perfect sense to me to reduce that commensurate with the reduction in revenue.
What's the current number of employees in building safety?
I think total from the public works side is about 25.
25.
That is a guess.
Any other questions, Mr. Weaver?
Just a comment. I think it was back in 1988, 89 that I chaired an integrated waste committee for Mayor Milner at the time. And we came up with these recommendations that I remember Kerry Morford, when he was there, I said, when's one of these recommendations going to come in? Still haven't. 20 years later.
I'll tell you, Mr.
And we're still talking.
Well, and now we're talking about, I mean, it was, to be honest with you, and I'm not passing the blame on anybody, but to try to get this through the California Air Resources Board and the South Coast Air Quality Management was nothing short of impossible. The sanitation districts actually put two programs into place in Commerce and in the southeast area of the county, and they've been so limited in what they can do. And I think technology's advanced tremendously. This is not a straight combustion burn.
Obviously.
But I'm hoping that folks are going to begin to lighten up and see what needs to take place. I don't believe, in all fairness and no disrespect to the sanitation districts, that putting it on a rail car and hauling it into a hole in the desert is what we want to do, especially if it's going to be $225, $250, $300 a ton. I can't imagine what the rate to our ratepayers would be. Considering it's $44 a ton now, just multiplying that, what kind of a rate we'd have to pay. I just don't think that's our future, or should it be?
And every city in the United States is ultimately going to be faced with the same problem.
Correct.
So we better find ways to divert it to 100%. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you very much. Next.
Oh, must be city attorney. God, I don't get to see him down there very often. How to do it up from up here?
Just like everybody else.
Looks like him.
With the exception of, I hope to avoid the coughing fit that I had last night.
Would be a good thing.
Is there a line item for Theraflu?
It's just the tail end of the head cold. I apologize in advance. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm very pleased to present our budget and the components of it that relate to the challenging economic times that we're facing today. Our mission statement is to provide professional quality legal services that ultimately protect the interests of both the city and, by extension, the community through defending the interests and providing advice to the council and departments. I've listed our core services there, and as we get into the next slide, it actually outlines the three different sections within the department: transactional, litigation, and code enforcement. Transactional is, as it states, sometimes known as internal services, where we prepare advice and opinions, ordinances, resolutions, motions, and contracts, and serve in an advisory capacity to all boards and commissions, some on a regular basis and others on an as-needed basis, and providing advice and assistance to the GRA Housing Authority and the City Council. Litigation is both from a defense side primarily and also initiating legal action, whether it be in collection matters or eminent domain matters. But we try to handle, for the most part, all litigation in-house except those cases that are voluminous or highly complex. Our code enforcement function, as you know, we pursue, as I note here, we pursue justice through fair and ethical prosecutions arising out of violations of the Charter and city ordinances. We seek compliance with a wide variety of codes. That includes the California Building Code, Mechanical Code, Plumbing Code, and housing codes adopted pursuant to state law. Just a very summary picture of our organization chart with a total of 21 staff, 14 attorneys, and 7 support staff. One of those support staff is a paralegal. Our goals and objectives for the 2009-2010 upcoming year are to, one, assist in reviewing an assessment of workers' compensation. Right now, workers' compensation matters, at least from the legal end, are handled by contract counsel, and we need to do work with both finance through their risk management section and also human resources to determine whether or not bringing workers' compensation litigation in-house would result in a number of efficiencies and possible cost savings to the city. So we're going to be engaging in an assessment of that. We would also like to produce and distribute an annual report delineating the activities of our office. One, to somewhat demystify what the city attorney's office does, and two, in the interest of transparency, to make sure the public understands how the workload is broken down and just what we do and how we do it. We do have an in-house group that is going to assist other departments in overseeing the city agency and housing authority, property disposition, relocation matters, and real estate transactions generally. We work primarily with the redevelopment agency, development services, and community development and housing. Likewise, while neighborhood services is taking a lead role in this, our office provides an assist. We want to continue to evaluate the possibility of modifying our code enforcement program through the use of an additional tool, and that is administrative code enforcement. We see some possible significant benefits from that, not the least of which is speeding up the code enforcement process with a number of types of code or alleged code violations. In addition, we would like to provide, this I think is critical given the council's public direction to us, to provide an increased level of service for code enforcement. Some would refer to it as aggressive code enforcement. Others would refer to, I tend to like to refer to it as a combination of aggressive and code enforcement and shifting our priorities to deal with quality of life issues that affect neighborhoods. And whether that's building structures or modifying structures without permits, opening up businesses without appropriate zoning use certificates and the like, but trying to work at providing an increased level of code enforcement. This will not only entail our office, but also working jointly with neighborhood services and other departments to try to compress or speed up the code enforcement process to gain compliance faster. And whether that either means by obtaining the necessary permits or removing an offending violation, our intention is to move forward in a different direction when it comes to that level of service for code enforcement. increasing the ability to handle CEQA and land use litigation defense without assistance from outside counsel. As you may know from some of our more recent cases, and I will refer to them as notorious land use cases that we've had over the past couple of years, it's quite expensive to use outside counsel to handle these CEQA litigation cases. We have recently handled one case successfully in-house. It ultimately resulted in a very favorable resolution. It involved the church and the ASLA property where we were sued under CEQA, and we were able to handle that in-house in full. We look at basically being able to save funds from handling those types of cases in-house to the extent that we can with current staff. We are also going to seek and obtain a status as a certified mandatory continuing legal education provider. The benefits that has is while we have a small travel and training budget, if we can certify ourselves as a provider of training and programs that we can get credit for through the state bar, we can do that in-house for our own staff, and number one, save potential money on training. It won't be a lot. But we can also collaborate with other cities, city attorneys' offices, city of Burbank, for example, the city of Pasadena, and do some cross-training as well, working them into the training program that we have and likewise taking advantage of theirs. And so I think we've already explored, we know what the requirements are, and we're well on our way to moving forward to certification. It will not be a difficult task, and we should easily accomplish that within this particular budget year. And lastly, to allocate resources as needed to provide timely services for departments. As part of the service level changes in the upcoming budget, we, like other departments, were required to reduce our budget by 5% or $93,300. Those actions that we took, which we recently adopted, was to eliminate the Chief Assistant City Attorney position. It was held by an employee who retired in October of 2008. That position was funded entirely by the general fund. And so we have eliminated that position and spread the work amongst existing staff. And we believe we will be able to continue to provide the same level of service. And again, we'll be in an assessment mode of that over the next year. But we believe we can provide the same level of service with existing staff. That resulted in a $94,512 savings, which met the 5% budget reduction. In addition, I want to point out that we work with finance in bringing back claims to our office. Claims had been shifted to a risk management function out of finance, and through working with finance, we brought claims back into our office, which resulted in approximately $95,000 savings to the finance department for their risk management section. And that is continuing to work. It's increased the workload within the office, but once again, we think it's manageable. We had assessed it initially to determine that we could do it, and we are and will be continually assessing that, but we believe we continue to be able to provide the same level of claim service that we were able to provide both when claims were in our office prior to and when claims were in risk management. And lastly, some other things that we're doing is we are, given the economy, private law firms are not immune from the economic downturn, and we've been carefully ensuring that all outside counsel who are using are giving us the best possible rate for the quality services that we demand of them. We've been negotiating our contracts, our outside retainer agreements with those firms to make sure that we get the best possible rate that we possibly can. The phrase in the industry is somewhat that is being used as taking a haircut. And we are certainly trying to make sure that these firms take a little bit off the top, knowing that there are other firms out there that are scrambling for business and that are lowering their rates. And so we're able to get a bigger bang for the buck with outside counsel right now. We've taken, while not on the PowerPoint presentation here, we've also taken a look at almost all of our operations, including things as small as the attorney service that we've used. We've changed attorney services. It saves us only a couple of $100 a year, but it's still areas that we can look at and begin to pick away to save as much money as we possibly can in these challenging economic times. Our office department totals of all of our funds are right there to see. It notes, as all other presenters have noted, that there's the new cost allocation determined by finance. That's why you see the increase in the preliminary M&O budget. The decrease is reflected in the salaries and benefits because we have not only a vacant position, but we've agreed to eliminate that position so that it will no longer appear on the books. Do note at the bottom that 8 attorneys that are paid through enterprise and non-general fund monies, and they're not reflected here. This is our general fund total budget, salary and benefits, and M&O, and again reflecting the the cost allocation that other departments have already discussed. We do have a slight increase in the M&O, and that's from our training budget. Our training budget has been somewhat static for many, many years. It was increased once a number of years ago, and we have mandatory continuing legal education requirements that all of my attorneys have to meet every 3 years. And as a result, we need to make sure that they have the training they need, one, to meet those requirements, two, to stay current on the law. So we want to make sure that there's enough money in training, and that money is actually coming from a portion of the savings, the salary savings from the vacated, now eliminated position. This is our other funds. We have some positions funded out of the liability fund. These are litigation positions. There are 2 litigation attorneys and part salary of a paralegal and a secretarial position. And again, there's a slight increase of $1,000. The main increase is shown in M&O, and again, that's because of the new cost allocation that was determined by finance to be applicable to our department. Our service level changes, reducing the budget for the additional 2.5% as requested. $46,652 is that 2.5% figure. Eliminating the remainder of that chief assistant city attorney position, in other words, completely eliminating it, results in an additional savings of $75,000, more than equaling the actually exceeding the 2.5% reduction. What we're looking at in future challenges and impacts with current staffing levels is the need to provide increased level for code enforcement. We currently and have had in the past 1 full-time code enforcement attorney with some assist by others in the office when needed on court appearances and the like. Ramping up code enforcement to compress the time, getting our office more involved at an earlier stage, filing complaints in court, and to try to press compliance on a much faster or on a fast track, and to try to deal with that quickly. We're going to do that with our current staff, but at this time it may be a challenge in the future that we're going to be looking at to make sure that we can provide that level of service that the community is demanding relative to code enforcement. And certainly if we feel that we're unable to do that, we will either shift priorities within the office or come back to you and let you know that. But at this point in time, we anticipate we should be able to do that with existing staff. Throughout all of the departments, we are an internal service department, and so we want to make sure we're allocating our resources to provide the timely services for all those departments. And again, with the one attorney with a vacant position that's now been eliminated, we will have to continue to make sure that we are looking at allocating those resources to address the needs of all those departments, including the City Council, GRA, Housing Authority, and other boards and commissions. I noted earlier about providing the additional service of producing and distributing an annual report. Thanks to the city manager's office for putting together that contact with USC. We have been in contact with their internship program, and we're looking at bringing on an intern to assist us in putting that together. And I think it'll be a great project for an intern with the data collected by our office. And likewise, meeting the requirements of the State Bar for mandatory continuing legal education certification and providing those types of training programs. With that, I'm free to answer any questions or comments that you may have.
Mr. Najarian.
I missed the 5% that you're taking out in 09, 010.
That's the vacant position created by the retirement in October of the Chief Assistant City Attorney.
I thought that was 08, 09.
That's the entire salary and benefits package of that position, because it's 100% funded by the general fund, was about $180,000. And we've allocated $95,000 of it met our 5%, or $94,500 met 5%.
Okay, so proportion between.
Yes, it was done in a proportional fashion. I mean, whether we allocate 5% in 08, 09 and 2.5% now, the total is probably closer to 8 to 9% total of our general fund budgets.
And what are the qualifications to fill that position? Knowledge of municipal government, and familiarity with government code.
We'll set you up. First, we're going to have to go through the city manager's office and the finance department to put that position back in the budget.
It requires the approval of the city council also.
That it does.
Get rid of me.
That it does.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
didn't even know.
Mayor Quintuero, members of council, my name is John Piquet. I am the Interim Information Services Director, and it is my pleasure, I guess, to walk you through, last on the list,
Or guess.
walk you through our budget. I will spare you reading the mission statement and the core services that are there, but I will tell you that basically anything that has to do with networks, hardware, software, PCs, services, servers, telephones, wireless devices, or radios, that we are involved to some extent. Show the tech guy where the button is. It's upside down.
We should have actually sabotaged the system.
Okay.
Doesn't look like you had to.
And he's studying it. You have seen it before, haven't
I want to qualify this by...
you? Usually, what is this?
We can call IS for you, John, if you want.
Okay. I have to be honest, even in this position, I am not a technician. I am not a proponent of technology for technology's sake. I am the person that you want to size the application, the technology to the function, so...
Yeah, but we will still have fun at your expense.
Yes, you will. So the mission statement is not to humiliate my department any further. All right, so we are divided into, let's try this again, 3 sections. Basically, they are applications, infrastructure, and wireless, and we provide internet access to wired and wireless devices, police patrol units, libraries, various offices via hotspots. We design and deploy web pages and sites, provide email services, manage and maintain cell phones, BlackBerries, provide police and fire radio systems, Verdugo Communications, ISIS, and some of the numbers are 3,000 PCs, 150 servers just in the Perkins Data Center, 2,200 telephone handsets, 2,400 telephone numbers, excluding cell phones, 20,235 files on various public websites, including web pages and PDFs, and a total of 25 websites. So we are busy. All right, what you guys do?
This down, and it goes to the right. Down.
Can you stay here? Okay, service level changes for 08 and 09 as are listed. The 5% reduction amounts to $250,463. And as you can see in the list there, the impact for elimination of the data entry operator position is slight, if any, increase to business units' workload if they were using the service. The reduction of the PeopleSoft ISF, basically it's just going to take a little bit longer to respond to requests for changes and fixes, et cetera, so a longer turnaround time. And the FileNet and ISF, by putting off upgrades, the application will still continue to function normally, but patches, fixes, enhancements, and new features included in an upgrade will not be applied. The software hardware fund is basically this, or the ISF is the same as the FileNet. And hardware, we are currently on a 6 to 7 year replacement cycle for standard business desktops, slightly less for servers and engineering class workstations, so this effectively adds a couple of months to the life cycle overall. You know what? All right. The proposed additional 5% reduction, and this is kind of a mix because we have done some of these already and some are proposed. The Wireless Communications Internal Services Fund, this is going to increase slightly the length of time radios stay in the field before being brought back to the shop, and then refurbished if they're still serviceable. They're then distributed to general fund departments such as parks, planning, and library. Potentially, this could require these departments to pay for replacements or additional equipment on their own, and those are about $5,000 a unit. The hardware and software training, that's a very sad story, I will approach later. Furniture and equipment, we're able to use this account for less expensive, infrequent purchases of technical hardware for isolated instances for our department as well as others, and it could force our customers to look elsewhere for money to purchase on their own. And the office and general supplies basically are just used to print color copies, purchase binders, and miscellaneous stuff for our reports, so it's a very slight impact.
Where am I? Funds. Now, this is interesting. This doesn't match my printout. It doesn't match my printout. This is
Just proves technology is out to get you, John.
You may be asking.
They win. I'm leaving in June. All right. All right. For the total of all funds in our department, as you can see, there's a decrease to our salaries and benefits, but it is a summary of all the increases and decreases in 910, and it's you'll see a fairly large increase, and that is driven by critical equipment replacement that is slated over the next few years. The general fund, most of our savings is going to be in the salaries and benefits through the elimination of one filled data entry position, which has already been done, and then slated one unfilled wireless tech position and one unfilled administrator position and miscellaneous downward allocations, which means that when we can replace folks with a classification that's a lower level but can still fill the function, we will do that. We also plan to reduce funding for hourly workers and contractual services to lower the M&O. And our internal service funds, you'll see a very large increase coming up. I can explain that. In salaries and benefits, the overall increase to salaries and benefits in our internal service fund is due to an increased demand for scanning services to enter multiple departments' documents into FileNet. We do this using hourly workers, but we're also offsetting that with a...
I note, seeing the perplexed look on Councilmember Draymond's, which I would assume is my same one, that these numbers aren't matching what the handouts are.
Right.
We'll get you the correct ones. I actually, John, do you know which ones are the correct ones? What's on the screen?
This is looking more realistic, yes.
We actually went through an adjustment yesterday when we reviewed these.
Literally yesterday afternoon after I turned in the first one.
Unfortunately, that didn't get transmitted apparently into the printed copy. So this is the correct information, and we'll get you the correct information.
So don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain. Then also, I was saying that this is offset, the increase is offset by a fee that we're collecting in the form of a tech fee, which is included in the permitting fees collected by Building Safety and Planning, and this is going to pay for an hourly worker to update and support the land information system, which is the foundation for the GIS permit system, city services interface, and other systems dependent on that type of data. The very large increase there, this entire increase is attributed to the approval for funding to begin replacing police and fire radios, and that is a huge project.
And again, just to note, that's money that has been set aside over a number of years. So that's not new money. That's money that's been set aside to do that.
And I did kind of want to focus on this, some of the across-the-board reductions that we're facing, 25% to the training and travel budget. And this reduction to training is particularly painful for us in IT. So many initiatives to move to advanced technologies are externally driven and out of our control. For example, applications can sometimes determine a hardware database platform that we're required to use. Staying current is a moving target, and although most of our dedicated professionals choose to keep themselves current, they cannot anticipate everything that might be required of them. And this puts us in a position of being more dependent on externally provided skills that we may not be funded for. And it's a problem that tends to feed on itself over time. It's just it increases exponentially as the technological landscape changes. And unfortunately, that means we'll very likely be extremely slow to take advantage of technologies designed to raise efficiency levels, such as Linux operating systems, which have no license fees, server virtualization that enables consolidation of hardware and associated expansive storage area network, and a host of other things. Future challenges that we do face, and I'm sure GWP will spend some time on the NERC requirements that they have, but we will be required to support them in that effort, and it may divert us from other things, other initiatives that we're involved in. In fact, it may require them to operate critical business functions of theirs on an independent network and systems. Staff that pretty much speaks for itself. And we have, in order to cut costs, we've pared back on our maintenance agreements. We're at the lowest level possible now for our hardware to help save costs. We covered the training. And there's a possibility we could potentially affect the currency of information available in systems. Comparable cities are going to have more robust features if they can figure their budget out. Systems could become more unstable over time without frequent updates and reduced levels of maintenance. I think I've done enough damage. So if there are any questions and comments.
Questions or comments?
Comments.
One.
Mr. Drain.
The only question I have, it's when the incoming or new Director of Information Services was speaking to us, he was talking about a variety of programs and initiatives and all sorts of things that he wanted to bring to the city of Glendale. Included things like sharing data systems and even tracking green technology and all sorts of things. That all fit into this?
I have been in close contact with Mr. Fraga, and he is very aware of the changes. And I think it's one of those, we're at a time now, and the economy in this instance is going to work to our advantage. It is a time to take a very introspective look at the way that we do things, to become more professional, more effective. Like I say, we speak on a fairly regular basis, and I promised him in this process that I would do my best not to decimate his budget, which, we've done our best to do. And I suspended some other actions that I was going to take, which would have further changed the landscape for him, and I just put that on hold until he can get here. But again, the timing is right. The planets are aligning. This is the right person for this job. And it's the right time. It's this organization. In the past, we have been allowed to do things very informally in IS, and we've tried to do more than we can actually support. I've been working with Bob Elliott very closely to look at ways of tightening up the way that we do things, not to enter into agreements without having a formal service level agreement with the departments that we're serving. To make sure that we can sustain the things that we enter into. And I do believe that Ed can make it fit in here, but it's going to take some cooperation from the rest of the organization to help us change the way we do business and the way that we interact with them. It's going to become much more formal than it has been in the past.
Well, it wasn't a question about whether Mr. Fraga is up to the task or any of that. It's just a matter of, I just wanted to know all of those very innovative things that he was describing to us, whether or not there is the capacity within the limits of what we have in front of us, or what you're talking about, to accomplish those things, or whether or not those are things that we probably be looking at sometime in a more distant future. That's all I was getting at.
If it helps, if I may, I know that in some of the conversations he is proposing, which I will let him introduce, some ways of actually generating revenues or saving costs in other ways that will help pull that all together.
So I think the answer is this program is not going to hamper his ability to come in and make even further changes, as he discussed with us.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Which I would encourage.
Very happy to hear your comments. I also assume that the price of whether it's hardware, even software services, I assume prices are beginning to slide in this economic situation we're in. Companies are more competitive.
That is true, yes.
Okay. Any questions?
Unless, of course, you're buying Apple.
Yeah, that's true.
No comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McFall.
Yeah, only just to add, despite John's somewhat sheer terror at public speaking, we are extremely grateful that he was willing to come in a few months ago to fill what was really a very difficult role. A lot of things were going on during the transition time when the previous director left, and John really has done an absolutely outstanding job. The other day, a couple weeks ago, when I went over and make the presentation about the new new director coming in, to give a little background, and to the employees, said, of course, I want to extend appreciation to John. They broke out into an applause that went on for a number of minutes. That they are and have been extremely grateful for the leadership that John has brought to the organization. And we're very grateful for this for the past several months that he has done.
Thank you.
Very good.
If I may say, though, I think the applause was based on they finally felt that the person they worked for knew less than they did. I just confirmed that. So
I don't think that's John. It's time to sit down.
He's certainly one of the funniest IT professionals.
For sure.
And we can get the right numbers. Okay. What's next?
That's it for today.
Wait, may I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
We got a sheet here, which I know is going to get on the public, and we're going to hear the same thing we've heard before. Population of the city has grown 5%. Staff's grown 31%. What are you doing? And it covers the span all the years I've been on council but one. And I voted for every one of these increases. But I know over that time span we added programs, consciously added programs that the community wanted. And I just wondering, is it possible to take like the last column and the percentage increase and footnote out what happened in the years that significantly changed the programs to cause this increase? Like, the easiest one come to mind, we consciously hired 25 more police officers and 12, 13 support. Consciously did that for reasons. And a lot of these increases over the years have been done for specific programs. And the general public won't know that unless we have some sheet with no, I don't know how tough a thing that is, but I assume it's not that bad.
Mr. Mayor, you might want to hear from your speaker, and then I can make a few comments following that.
Okay. I have two cards. First is Herbert Milano, followed by Evelyn Hansen.
Thank you very much. Mayor Quintero, Council Member Freeman, and Council Members, City staff. My name is Herbert Milano. I would really would appreciate if before my comments I'm not preempted with some commentary with regard to what I'm about to speak, because I think some of these things might be relevant. And by the way, thank you very much, Mr. City Manager, with regard to your courtesy. The opportunities that we have with this once-in-a-century type recession gives you, the City Council, a unique opportunity to either restructure government or, at a very minimum, rethink how budgeting is done, or perhaps bring into the budgeting process the whole idea of performance evaluation and performance standards. But it also gives us an idea, an opportunity to bring up the subject of how we think about employee compensation as well. I would hope that this City Council would undertake a study of the trends that have occurred during a fairly large span, let's say 5 to 10 years. It is my hope that you take a look at not just the payroll numbers, but also how we structure pensions and benefits, including health care, and also the performance issues of how is the best effective use of personnel going to be evaluated. Yes, the sheet that I gave you is the information that came from the workforce demographic documents that came from the Finance Department. As best as I could fill in some of the years, especially 2008, which we only had full-time employees available. And this is why I've been asking for equivalent employees, so that I could provide you with a more equitable presentation with regard to the employee trends. Nonetheless, as you can see, some departments have been maintained fairly static with regard to the number of employees. For example, the City Clerk's Office and the City Treasurer's Office. No changes in 10 years. Others grow depending on other factors, variables, such as population trends, economic changes, let's say more economic activity, or other things that are mandated, let's say, by the state or federal governments. But nonetheless, as you look at what I would call a butchered chop type of cutting, 5% across the board, sometimes we forget the fact that some departments, for example, like Parks and Recreation, will continually increase as you increase the amount of parkland that is available, or as you try to initiate new programs and services. Nonetheless, I think that for the increases in employment, there are some increases that are justified with regard to those variables, and there are others that are fairly static, irrespective of the kind of activity that you have. So when you're looking at public works, you look at, for example, building and safety and the number of, let's say, permits or studies that they're doing, and you'll find that as the activity decreases, you would find some decreases in there, but you still are going to need a certain amount of basic staff. And it's not what I'm seeing in the discussions, that we're not really looking at those areas that are truly variable and those that are fairly static with regard to the assignment of personnel, or at least I'm not hearing it during these budget sessions. And I think that this process, especially in these hard economic times, allows you the opportunity to really rethink as to how you're approaching this whole process. I've been asking for precisely what you're doing now in a more systematic way every single year, so that you dedicate not just 30 minutes or an hour to one particular department, but actually take it through a whole month during 4 sessions, so that we're better able to gauge issues about performance. We have an increase in police of around 25% in the last 10 years. Has it shown up in corresponding significant decreases in crime, for example, or has there been other significant benefits? Because we tend to put police and fire in such a high status that we oftentimes do not tend to go out there and risk politically to evaluate how it is that they're doing. But if I take the comments of the police chief during his commentaries that appear in the news press, that he's most proud of the K-9 unit, well, the K-9 unit has not provided any reductions with regard to arrests or convictions, for example. I mean, it is worth evaluating how it does, even though the costs to the city are not necessarily high. And so the same thing with regard to helicopter use and so forth. The thing is that we have an opportunity to evaluate and to create standards of performance to which all departments should become accountable. And that's, I think, the part that is really missing in this whole process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Evelyn Hansen.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mayor, Council, staff. In defense of the IT guy, it is the person you want in a support position. You want someone who is technically challenged. Those of us who are technically challenged are much more sympathetic to our users than the snotty little brat who was born knowing this stuff. Secondly, I'm just a simple citizen, and I wouldn't be up here talking to you, and I wouldn't have ever come to City Council if I hadn't had such extensive experience with this city's legal department. I bought one of those great old houses that was an absolute wreck, and going to fix it up and restore it to the beauty that it once had and make it a real asset to the city and to the neighborhood, as well as restoring my family home. My father had let it totally decay. It was awful. Just after I bought the house, I had developers coming to me wanting to buy it because it's a half acre sitting right next to condos, and that property is large enough that it controls the zoning for the area. They wanted to take the zoning to condos, and I fought it. It was decided by zoning that my property was large enough, with the few neighbors I had, that if we didn't want it zoned for condos, it didn't go. It was just after that decision that it really all came to a head, but there were multiple things in that. I think that we could really increase the level of service to the citizens of Glendale, as well as really decreasing the money spent, if we just either significantly cut or totally eliminated neighborhood services. I haven't heard one person, and in my experience, because I've been vocal about it, lots of people have come to me and told me their stories. Not one of them has said, "Hey, you're wrong. You're giving these guys the short end of the stick here. They've really done good by me. Boy, they've really done good things." Everyone who has come to me with a horror story. Some of them worse than my own, such as the tree ordinance, some of them not as bad. I know that on your own council, at least one member has had trouble with neighborhood services being unreasonable with them. And as far as frivolous litigation filed, how much did it cost the city for me to attain this file? I don't know how big the city attorney's file is, but this is my file on my court case. The two of them that were filed against me because I have mulch in my yard. 6.5 years dealing with neighborhood services and the city attorney's office because I use mulch. Now, it is not Scott Howard. Scott Howard is great. I used to be a paralegal who prepped attorneys to go against other attorneys, and I was good at my job. I would stand in fear of prepping an attorney to go against Scott Howard. He's good. Only one attorney in his office was unreasonable. Paul Early, who had this case most of the time, didn't even want to look at the permits I had to rewire my house that included rewiring a light fixture that had been in my house, on the exterior of my house, since 1924, and he accused me of installing without a permit. Since 1924, it was there. I had extensive documentation. I had all of the application that I used, but Paul Early didn't have any interest in seeing it. And neither did the inspector that came out to look at my house. And for 6.5 years, I'd find him wandering my property without permission and without an escort. He'd be walking through newly planted garden beds, killing my plants, because he thought the picture would be better here. Picture of a fire hydrant that I have in my yard for as a decorative garden item. Pictures of a pile of bricks that I was going to be using as stepping stones. Pictures of the second case that was filed was because there was an approximate 68 square foot garden out of my over 18,000 square foot yard. About a 68 square foot garden that I had just planted in, but the vegetation wasn't visible. So he filed under the stealth codes that I've told you about, these 3 pages, section 1001.11, that the Building and Safety Department doesn't have. I guess we're trying to save on paper by not supplying them with this code. It's just totally unreasonable. You've got enough people in this city who are good at what they do, who understand things, and would be more than happy to volunteer to do what Neighborhood Services does. A lot of them already do it and report to Neighborhood Services. You've got interns at many law schools that would love to help do this kind of thing and apply the codes to real-world situations to help them later in their career. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Starbird.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, just a couple of observations. I was frankly pleased to hear Mr. Milano reference sort of the, I guess, the quality of the table he passed out to you. Because I did some quick checking on my own this morning, and I went to the internet, and I went to the same documents that Herbert goes to. And there are some numbers that I think I just put a big question mark beside as being accurate. I just quickly checked the last numbers of the years 2006, 7, 8 in the blue table he distributed, and have very different numbers except for 2008, which raises questions about the source and validity of the other numbers in the table that arrived at the 31% increase in total staffing over the 10-year period. But even taking that as a given, the 31% increase, and I think I'd want to go back and look and see what the numbers were and where they were drawn from for the earlier years, but let's assume the 31% is accurate. It doesn't include the adjustments that we made going into this fiscal year. Not the adjustments you've listened to throughout these department discussions, which will be additional positions cut. But we have eliminated 66 full-time positions just in the general fund, and we are currently holding about 100 positions currently vacant as part of our freeze. But that brings the increase in full-time positions over the 10-year period to about 26.5%. Now, you saw comparisons with Glendale's population a lot before the election, because, frankly, it looks good if you're trying to criticize the city, because our population is stagnant. Is it a fair basis to evaluate whether or not cost should increase? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As I asked Mr. Najarian prior to this meeting how long his family numbers have been stagnant, pardon the phrase stagnant, but he's been 4 family members now for about 10 years, and I said, so in the past 10 years, the cost of your household budget hasn't increased in that period of time? Well, the answer obviously is no, it has. We all know that. This morning, I came in a little early and pulled together just some numbers, again, off the Internet, to use as a comparison. If you want to look at some other bases for comparison, whether it's salary growth or numbers of employees. And if you look at the personnel costs for the city, there's 2 components you have to look at to evaluate any changes. The numbers of people, as Mr. Weaver pointed out. We have changed the numbers of people. We add parks, as Mr. Milano indicates, and he's always a champion for more parks. More parks bring the need for more services, either through contract or by hiring additional people. And what you're paying those people that you've hired. As Mr. Weaver noted, we have, in the time that I've been here, taken on some very considerable programs and have staffed up for those. The police department increased staffing was 31 positions. We took on municipal paramedic services, was about 36 additional positions. Every time we've done a park, George will say we haven't always given him more positions, but we've tried to keep up, and those require more staff, more contract costs. So there are those 2 components, but let's take a look at those for just a second. The Consumer Price Index over the same period of time that Mr. Milano has evaluated on his table has gone up about 33%. Now, many people would think that the CPI is a good basis of comparing many things. It's used all the time. I would say that's not necessarily an accurate comparison of how much our staff positions should go up. But even based on his numbers, staffing hasn't gone up any more than the Consumer Price Index has gone up. Even though our population has been stagnant, property tax revenues have gone up over an 8-year period, an average of about 8 to 9% a year, or about 83% over the same period of time. Assessed valuations which would be some indication of the value of property we're needing to protect, for example, through police and fire, has gone up about 86% in the same period of time. I look specifically at police salaries because you heard a lot about that over the last 2 years and the growth in police salaries. Ignoring the increase in positions, let's just look at what officers make. Police salary increases over the past 10 years have gone up 39%. And I looked at the increases given to the officers for a 10-year period of time. 39%, about 3.9% a year. As I noted earlier, CPI has gone up 33%. So that would indicate that in order to keep up with the market, over 10 years we've done a little more than 6% increase over what inflation has done. I don't think that's unreasonable as a comparison to see what's happened with the actual cost of the positions over the same period of time. My point here is, if you go on the Internet and spend any time, you can find 1,000 different things to compare. And we can't anticipate what Mr. Milano might come in with next. But if you look at these on a complete basis, I think what you'll find is the city has been rather prudent, but where you have seen need for increases in services to respond to either the demand by residents or need by residents, you've made those adjustments. And there are periods of time where we have to go through corrections. As Mr. Milano points out, we happen to be in one of those. 66 full-time positions of the general fund have been eliminated so far before we even put this next year's budget to bed. And we're doing the steps that he has suggested to look at the efficiency, the effectiveness, and ways that we can reduce the cost in all of our operating departments. And we will continue to. So that would be my observation.
Mr. Weaver. Jim, I owe you a big apology. We've been handed out a lot of material lately and already passed these sheets out at lunch. Not that they were coming from staff. I was asleep on the switch. I didn't read down here. Ms. Milano put this sheet together. I apologize, but I still think it wouldn't hurt sometime what the real number increases are. Because we used to have a report came out, I think we stopped in about 2001 or 2.
The statistics report.
Statistics, yeah. And it showed how many increases where.
Yeah.
Something like that might be valuable to put some of this to rest, so to speak. And one other thing. when you talk about the police increases, the police also get step increases, don't they?
Yes.
So during that period of time, they're also getting step
That's right.
increases,
right.
including the CPI.
Yeah. Let me make one more comment, Mr. Mayor, if I can. Yesterday, Mr. Milano indicated that I think he was making a comparison between what L.A. City employees contribute to their retirement system, which is an L.A. City retirement system, as opposed to what I think he related as Glendale employees contributing to the state public employees retirement system. And he indicated that L.A. City was 13% and we're 1%. Is that correct, Mr. Milano?
Yes, I was referring to the increases, yes.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I was referring to the MOU stated increases in the future with regard to any additional increases with regard to the...
I thought you indicated that was what the employees contribute.
That would be the employee contributions upon the increases that occur on the helpers.
Actually, employees in Glendale contribute, if you're not safety, contribute 8% of their gross wages into the retirement system. My salary was quoted a lot in the months leading up to the election. I pay 8% of that gross into the PERS system. That percentage went up 1% 2 or 3 years ago. It has been 7% for the years that I have been, the years and years I have been in the state system. The city's contributions, and I've been in 4 cities all under the PERS system, the city's contribution has changed from year to year depending on the actual experience and the return that PERS gets in the investment of its portfolio.
Actuarial.
In the police department, their contribution is 9%. It used to be 8%, and then when cities began to adopt the 3% at 50, it went up an additional 1% to 9%. And those employees in Glendale have consistently contributed 9% of their gross pay on anything was called PERSable into the PERS system. However, the city's rate has fluctuated depending on PERS returns, and I should note that there were a good number of years, almost the entire decade of the 90s, Glendale contributed zero into the system.
I was here.
So the employer's contribution, and if you go back before the 90s, there were times when the employer's contribution was as high as 30% into PERS. Glendale was at zero. Many, many cities across the state were at zero during the 90s because PERS was generating such a tremendous return on their investment portfolio. The employee's contribution, however, stayed the same and has continued to be the same throughout those many years. Correct, Matt?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, if I could make a slight correction to Mr. Starbird's head. For the safety rate for our police officers, firefighters, it is a 9% plus a 1.5% cost sharing. So
it's actually
cops and
10.5%.
firefighters, it's actually 10.5%, and for the rest of us, the miscellaneous, it's 8.5%.
Right. The 9 is the PERS established rate, and then through our contract, our employees pay an additional percentage on top of that. So.
Can I ask another question? Sure. Something else that Mr. Milano raised was performance indicators. Do we not look at the performance of our employees?
Yeah, yearly.
Mr. Mayor, members of council.
I'm just trying to clarify this for the public, mind you.
We absolutely do. Every employee in this organization is subject to an annual job performance evaluation completed by their department. In addition to that, newly hired employees, while they're on probation, they're evaluated multiple times during that probationary period to determine if they meet the standards and they would end up passing probation. So, but we are very much on top of annual performance evaluations, and it does determine whether or not someone does advance within their salary step range. You have to meet the standard in order to move to the next salary step. So,
any other comments or questions? Mr. Starbird, will you tell the public when the next meeting will be?
Bob, do you have the schedule you can put up quickly?
Tuesday.
We come together again on Tuesday, this next Tuesday at 9:30, and what do we have on tap to review then?
Actually, next Tuesday, we don't meet in the morning. We meet in the afternoon with Community Development and Housing.
At
and then
2:30.
On 2:30. Then on Wednesday, we'll start, similar to today, we'll start at 9:30 and go through 2 o'clock, and we have 5 departments: the City Treasurer, City Clerk, Glendale Water and Power, and Fire. We originally had Community Development and Housing, but we will be doing that in the afternoon.
And Mr. Mayor, if I can...
So they're Thursday, going.
And then we also have Thursday, and we're coming back on Thursday. This is a time when
Pretty much an
council
all
has
day.
said we'll take whatever time we need to wrap it up. So
up.
that's beginning at 10 a.m., could go as long as 7 in the evening or longer. That'll be the police department will do their final presentation then, and then that's when we're going to bring all this back together again for council's final determinations, feedback, whatever we need.
If I can, I really want to thank you all for your level of attention and the level of conversation and discussion and debate that went on here today. That's exactly what, frankly, we've been hoping for as we work through these difficult policy decisions. So thank you.
Okay, thank
Move we
you.
adjourn.
We are adjourned.